right? Can I start?
Yes. Okay, give us 1 minute. We have a live stream issue. Okay, this is too big, huh? This is okay. Okay, Anupama, we're ready. You can go.
Is this being recorded then?
It is recorded, and I'm going to record it here too.
Thank you. Would be good
Recording
to record.
in progress.
So let me start by saying thanks to Omar for having me here at short notice and for keeping me awake all night, putting this presentation together. I also look forward to discussions thereafter, maybe not only today, but even as and when questions come up. It gives me great pleasure to see that we are all sitting here together and discussing the future of Auroville and sitting together and trying to understand architectural concepts and urban visions. So with that, I would like to use the opportunity to share with you some of the urban design principles that are embedded in Auroville's city plan. I would like to lay the emphasis on the word "ville" in Auroville. So a lot of, I've heard over the years, and you know, since I've been involved since 1990, which is over 30 years ago. So I think there is perhaps a lack of information about the work that had been ongoing in Roger's office perhaps, and discussions that took place between him and the mother and between him and others who were involved in designing details. So I've put together some of the key points for you to share with you a little bit what we have been doing regarding urban design. So like I have often seen that you know, the galaxy plan's image, that it is so widely circulated that it often results in the galaxy plan being understood by some people just as a logo almost. But indeed, it was a city plan. And unlike most cities where people often present city models with road structures and plots, Auroville was much more advanced as a design. It included urban design and it included building masses. Such a plan could not have been possible without detailed definitions of buildings and green spaces. These were not just conceptual that many people think. They were calculated. All the densities were calculated. The per person habitation of 30 square meter was laid down. Various collective facilities were planned and located. It was all very systematic and planned. I want to recall, I want you to sort of try to study the model that everybody knows in a three-dimensional manner. And if you look at it from this shot, you'll realize that all these building volumes, building edges, densities, building heights, everything was defined, and that the model itself was a result of detailed calculations that were made not on the basis of typical city planning assumptions, but based on detailed discussions between Roger and the mother about what the aim of Auroville was, why it had to be a city, and what can begin, what kind of adventure can begin once we actually have this type of a city. So it was the aim was to envision a very different kind of city than conventional cities, and therefore a lot of complexity had to be worked out in great detail beyond roads and streets and plots. I would like to quote here the way the city plan is understood in the architectural world. I'm quoting Madhavi and Nikki Desai, who are based in Ahmedabad, and John Lang, who together produced the most important book, I would say, Architecture and Independence, A Search for Identity, India 1880 to 1980. They quote Auroville as the exemplar of rationalist urban design thought in India, which has no formal debt to Le Corbusier. So the fact that it was a rational urban design that led to, was innovative in the context of innovation in city planning. This was a recognized fact right in the beginning. And in fact, you will be happy to know that Auroville is going to be shown in MoMA in a few months. And exactly for this reason, it's in the context of non-colonial approach to city planning in the South countries. So I want to also, for some people who question, perhaps because of the haphazard way in which Auroville happened to develop over the last 53 years, despite having such a strong plan, I would like to summarize that Auroville was always seen as a city. It was always referred to in all the quotes and brochures that were produced in the time that the mother was there, an ideal city for an ideal society, the city the earth needs, the city of dawn. So, it has to be urban in character. On the other hand, Auroville was also seen as a model city in India and for the world. So India, if you look at the Indian context, India cannot afford to get its urbanization wrong. We know what is the cost of sprawling, and we know, all of us will recall Mother's quote about Auroville being located in India. India has become the symbolic representation of all the difficulties in present-day humanity. India will be the site of its resurrection, the resurrection of a higher and truer life. Every day there are articles about India and urbanization and haphazardness. See, the thing is that let's just realize what Auroville will have to be in order to be a model city in India. India has 1/6 of the global population, occupying only 2.4% of the world's land. So India has a population that is enormous to its land availability, and if you sprawl, not only are we going to spread, see the traffic jams now in Pondi and even in Auroville. The fact that we will need individual or public vehicles or public transport, but in any case, this type of sprawling is something we cannot afford. From the time the Auroville plan was conceived in 1965, we have tripled our population. So can you imagine all the more how much we have to be compact in order to still be a relevant model for India? So this is something really, really to understand before I explain some of the urban design issues. This was because maybe people are not aware of this, but Roger's office was given this type of a detailed brief, and that's why the figures that they calculated and the density had to do with that kind of aim that was set for Auroville, to be a model city in the context of India. You can see how how compact India is, even in the low density areas that in former times, this is, we are living in a very luxurious situation with so much land around us, but actually the land that we are stewarding right now was meant to develop a city that is not less compact. We know that, what the common man faces and how cities in India are unlivable. Auroville has, right from the beginning, chosen to address all these issues in a holistic way, to radically rethink mobility, density, but always keeping human scale in mind, even though it's a compact city, negotiating high-rise with low-rise, high-tech with low-tech, and all kinds of complex infrastructure questions. All of that has been synthesized in this urban plan. So I personally have the opinion that if what we build is not urban, it's not Auroville, because it's very important that to remember that quote in which we were expected to begin with a model town and end with a perfect world. I mean, of course, there is a utopian aspect, but on the other hand, the looking upon Auroville as utopia makes us sometimes feel that it's never going to be achieved. So I would rather remind us also that Auroville was, for me, I mean, the way I understand it, more than utopia, it is a laboratory. So the important thing is to experiment. And to experiment means to try out things that we were not tried out before. We are not actually here to repeat what we know has happened everywhere else, and it will, if we don't proactively go the planned way, then we are repeating already in a virgin land that we had the opportunity to build a city upon. We have already put our own organic growth and scattered development in a manner that we may be standing in our own way today. So I would like to clarify some myths versus facts, because a lot of, in Auroville, maybe there is a notion that organic growth is preferred. Maybe the new residents who come in the last decade or so may not, I don't know, perhaps they know it. I'm just going to put it out there because there are myths that I keep hearing about how Auroville was planned to be, and having worked with the archive of Roger, I have got to understand that many of the basic essentials are perhaps either not understood, or we may even be in collective denial about that. It would be in any case good to discuss some of these issues. I'm going to refer to only one report to make it simple for today's presentation. I'm referring to the 1965 report that Roger Anger's office produced and the 1968 master plan, which was presented by Roger on the basis of the report he made in 65. So it was a 3-year-long intensive work with daily interaction with the mother. And on the 1965 report, the mother had written hand notes. I would suggest all those who don't want to go through the lengthy archive should at least see this one report. It will be so revealing for us. So first and foremost, it was a vision-driven planned city. It is meant to still be that. And it was not it was not primarily supporting organic growth. It was the top-down approach, may look authoritative to some people, but the bottoms-up, without the top-down, could be very much of a high risk. We could be risking the whole vision if we do not merge the bottoms-up with awareness of the top-down and see how a true collaboration could happen. I always think of Sri Aurobindo's symbol and the Matri Mandir design, where the earth opens up to receive the vision, and the top-down, the vision heads downwards. So there's a top-down and a bottoms-up that could actually merge in a perfect collaboration, and that is the way to manifest things in any case. So the driver of this urban, the driver for the way Auroville ought to develop is the vision of the future and the mission, rather than references from past cities. And therefore, in a lot of work that was done in Roger Anger's office, they relied a lot on imagination, not only on past knowledge, because the future cannot be predicted. It can only be enabled, and I think imagination is a very, very important human attribute that one can build on, rather than past knowledge, which will fall short for our future, given our population expansion. So, what are the unique features of Auroville? What makes Auroville unique? In Roger Anger's own words, what makes Auroville different from other cities is its program, its aim, and its role. And also to recognize that ordinary towns do not propose anything other than individual needs and exclusive materialism. This is like a pitfall that we might want to avoid if we consider that the aim of Auroville and why people who come to Auroville and to build this city would need somehow are being asked to go beyond their personal preferences and their individual needs, although those will be also covered. Still, the larger aim is important. Roger Anger's collaborator, Mario Eman, in 1966, he compared ancient cities with the future approach for Auroville's development. He said the unity of ancient cities was assured by materials, tradition, and ignorance of other styles. That means people built in a similar manner and it was automatically coherent when there was organic growth. But given the diversity that will be needed for Auroville, people coming from all the different countries and all their different ways of living, this will have to be harmonized by the application of simple guidelines coordinated by urbanists and the collaboration by architects in order to prevent the chaos of suburbs that you see everywhere. This is also something to bear in mind as we go forward. As a result, Roger explained that for him, primarily it is a people-centric city where the human scale has to be conserved and not be lost in infrastructure and machine scale of, given that there is such a high density demand. So, for a number of years, he said, he has devoted himself to an architecture concerned with man as a social being. So he was trying, if you look at, discover the galaxy plan's model, you'll realize all the social spaces. If you don't imagine this to be a car-dominated city, then you will discover the intimacy and the opportunity for social interaction. That was very, very important for Roger. Auroville will attempt the rehabilitation of streets. That means going from road towards street, a change from rushways to a satisfying and happy system of circulation, from meeting place to meeting place, squares, fountains, gardens, pools, staircases, wings of shade, sudden shafts of sunlight. For mobility, so now what I'm mentioning here are all, here going forward, are issues quoting only that one document of the 1965 report. Right in the beginning, from the very beginning, Roger had asked the question, shall we allow the presence of cars? And he had written, the reign of cars has conditioned the urbanism of the 20th century and continues to tyrannize it. Therefore, the option to follow is to suppress this usage within the town. At that time, nobody was really talking about the car receding. In fact, Le Corbusier had planned Chandigarh for the car. And so there was a different kind of Brasilia and other places around that same time were conceived in a very, very different manner, car-centric, as opposed to Auroville's plan. And that's the main distinction between Auroville's urban design and those other cities that were being generated at the time. And perhaps why Auroville was misunderstood also as a design. The other unique aspect is that we are beyond land ownership. What this means is that the urban design of Auroville is unique in that urban design guidelines and setbacks are not defined by individual plot definitions based on separate ownerships. So all the DDPs will have to find another way of defining urban building guidelines, given that the basis itself is different. On the contrary, it allows a new urban experiment through a new basis, and it's a great opportunity for continuity and connectedness and a sense of unity throughout the city. Auroville's aim was to achieve human unity, and the design of the whole city also contained a sense of synthesis of everything, despite 4 different zones, despite all this complex program. The sense of unity is manifested through the design of the city. Regarding the location between the main roads, he had asked, in order to avoid them and yet at the same time best benefiting from both. So Auroville was always located between the two roads. He explained why. Because they wanted to be near enough to be connected, but far enough for the city center to be still and quiet. And you see the green belt is also there to protect that. But I will come to the green belt in a minute. Auroville, why? Because in the near future, they will become heavy traffic roads, and the coming into existence of Auroville will inevitably speed up the process. So Roger's team already predicted exactly what is happening, because it was already planned and it was known that Auroville's growth will create even more traffic. Furthermore, in the specific case of Auroville, its center must be as far as possible from all major axes of circulation due to the presence of the Mother's Pavilion in the Park of Unity. Later it was what we know as Matri Mandir. The population of 50,000, many people also question the population and they think it could be anything. There are many theories I have heard or rumors, but in fact, if you look at the whole conversations, the population of 50,000 was set, even though Roger wanted to sprawl a bit more than he finally did, because the mother wanted it to be compact, but 50,000 was decided as the critical mass necessary to conduct all the aspects of experiments and innovations that are foreseen as an integral part of Auroville's purpose, education, economy, etc. So this quote that I feel is also quite relevant when people talk to the mother about not growing until we have more clarity. The mother said, now there are 30 of you. It is difficult, isn't it? When there are 30,000 of you, it will be much easier. There will be many more possibilities. Regarding zones and mixed use, mother's sketch, in fact, the word zones was not really used at the time, and I think later, post-industrial zoning criticism, which was meant for very large cities, have been sometimes used to smear sort of, or to sort of have led to some misunderstanding about zoning and its irrelevance. The thing is that Auroville's plan, through this rotation and through the spiraling that Roger introduced into this kind of a sketch that the mother gave him for 4 different sections, this kind of approach was done by Roger's office to increase the mixed use. And through this rotation, you will see in the city center, it's like a melting pot. It's like when you stir your coffee, you'll see all those lines, they become radial and they become cohesive. So the city center is just one melting pot of all those 4 zones which radiate into it. You will notice that the spiraling movement was introduced at a later stage. There has been grid, geometry explorations in a rectangular plan. Then it came down to a radial one. And then because Roger wanted to experiment with mixed densities to enable low-rise, low-density, he created also high-rise, which you see in the macro model in the lower left. And then you'll see how it compares and what it really does. So the rotation is not because of some fetish towards imitating some form, or like many people say it is some kind of a holy geometry from copying the galaxy. Well, this originally came through a process of rational steps, but also, of course, there's always an irrational inspiration that also enters and works simultaneously. In any case, the zones in Auroville are there, but in each zone there is mixed use defined to what extent. So the word galaxy and the urban form was, like I said, the result of urban design and rational considerations rather than mere imposition of the galactic shape and form for decorative or nostalgic reasons. If you study some of the process work, you will understand the degrees of, like the amount of rigorous work that took place here to define those roads, the streets, the character and the urban massing, in order to allow a rich variety of densities, rather than cities like Berlin and Paris where all the buildings are 5-story, or in Madrid 8-story, you know. It was to allow different experiments in Auroville and yet achieve the density. Also, what is important to understand, that unlike other cities, we have two important poles of development: the international zone and the cultural zone. So the industrial zone, which in fact was called the economic zone, actually it is not. It was for us residents to go and work. It was not primarily seen, the word industrial zone came much later, but it was called the economic zone in the plan. So the residences and the economy are, you know, you can, they have a very close relationship, and you can go through the city center quickly, walk through and reach the other side. And the two zones which are very busy are interspersed with two other park-like zones. One is the cultural zone and one is the international zone. So it was very important for me, this diagram in the master plan, that explains that there are three poles of development. One is the inner development, Matri Mandir, and for the outer development, because we are not actually here to, you know, to focus on our individual needs. So housing and our workspaces were existing, but two broad zones were conceived where our development had to be focused on in order to attract the right people for Auroville's aim. So the cultural zone was meant to be a place where we ourselves could work on our inner culture and develop our inner task you know, from the children who, from the little kindergartens until the larger, you know, buildings we need and social infrastructure we need to develop our own culture that's located there. And all the researches without, you know, from other countries, from everywhere in the world that are useful for human unity are to be invited. So that is the international zone. So Auroville has a very big role to play in attracting interaction from the rest of the world, and the inner researches focused in the cultural zone, the external researches brought in through the international zone melt and intersect in Siru. Siru is that point, very important, where this social research will be located, and Matri Mandir will be the central pole of our cohesive force, that is the soul of our city. So, regarding climate, runoff of water, etc., also already for those who are concerned about sustainability, they will find that in the 65 plan, there's a general layout. It was mentioned that in the general layout of Auroville, the climatic data was of primary importance. In particular, the southeast direction of the prevailing winds. They must determine the orientation of the overall plan, or at least that of the buildings. To respect this is an essential factor for comfort and well-being and will impact the architecture as well. Furthermore, the capital problem of drainage prevents from formulating any substantial option regarding the location before undertaking an extremely complex study of a large area of the land to the southwest. So a lot of people feel that there was no data at that time, but on the contrary, a lot of work was done to get the essential data to conceive of an artificial lake in the center and so on. And the things that were not known were left open to be discovered later in consultation with the mother. Mobility. So, sorry, I have already spoken about this, but what is important is in the report, when Roger asked, you know, the whole paragraph is here to understand the mother's response. The mobility principle of Auroville must be defined right now. Shall we allow the presence of cars? Probably in just a few years, India will know, same as Europe and the US, the major urban problem the automobile is. The reign of cars, I've said this, so I'm not going to repeat. I'll just jump to this other part. Although outdated and everybody knows it, still the automobile strives at its best to create hell inside the cities and kill the outskirts. Therefore, the option to follow is to forbid and suppress the usage of this means of transportation within the town and replace it by another, more hygienic, less cumbersome and noisy, more aesthetic, maybe newer if possible. The mother had answered on the same note, with a note, small vehicles electrically powered carrying about 200 kgs at a 15 km/h speed. The crown, which I won't have too much time to elaborate, is to be understood in the context of the city center, where beyond the crown into the center, it is a park. Most cities are congested and they become in the city center and they become less dense towards the periphery. Auroville is the opposite. The city center is peace, calm, and space for reflection and for cohesive, for the cohesive force that is required to define the collective life of Auroville and allow the central area of common ground to radiate on all the sides. And therefore the crown is the spine of pedestrian collective life. So instead of having a busy center, the crown, it's like a longer length has been achieved so that all the facilities can be located halfway between the city center and the periphery. Regarding compact city versus sprawl, also that was known before. Roger had written, we must also avoid the pitfall of a cold, deserted city because of an excess of separating spaces. This is a comment to zoning. Not to build a too scattered city is indeed of capital importance. What we have to ponder upon and solve is the difficult problem of urban agglomeration to avoid the pitfall of the dormitory cities of known new towns and the sprawling of the individual in American housing. So the mother had underlined to avoid the pitfall and marked the last two lines and wrote in the margin, very important, the sprawling of the individual. The need for precise regulations. Many people also feel that in Auroville, you can do whatever you want and express your personal dream, continue the tradition of building ad hoc that we had to do in the very beginning period perhaps. But, in fact, for Auroville, precise regulations, even more precise than other towns, were foreseen. The plan of each section will have to radiate its own atmosphere, sometimes even evoking a certain free reign of fantasy, recreating the freedom of ancient urban settlements before the disease of ill-understood urbanism imposed its laws. Rocher wanted to avoid too many bad guidelines that do not protect cities. So he didn't want that kind of building codes, but much more sensitive ones, which will be in collaboration with architects. As time goes on, the architecture of Auroville ought to be controlled by precise regulations, defining, besides the general layout, also a palette of colors, of fences and materials, its maintenance, etc., to be monitored by a responsible service of Auroville. This is to prevent an unavoidable laissez-aller in the future. The mother marked in the second part of this paragraph and wrote in the margin, this provision is indispensable. Yet they conceived of a diversity of housing typologies. Anyhow, the best solution would be to come up with a large spectrum of types of accommodations as well as buildings interconnected in series with patios, terraces, etc. Only such a mixture can allow a play of volumes that is not monotonous. The mother had said, very good, I'm in favor of some diversity in the types of accommodations according to the residence typology. So there are systematic typologies planned out and laid and distributed across the city plan in a planned manner. So lean the force these high concentrations of tall buildings were restricted to in order to allow this diversity of different typologies, housing typologies. These kind of structures were seen as balancing elements, so that top down, like how to say, that there could be enough of high-rise and high-tech housing that accommodates the density, but not everyone has to live like that. So that the rest of the city can be fairly low density, walkable without elevators. So I'm not going to go into the guidelines, but there have been many guidelines we prepared based on how these buildings were conceived. Even for sustainability, those who feel that the planned approach may compromise sustainability issues, we all know for India that in order to be sustainable, first and foremost, we have to have compact cities, and we cannot justify few people spread over many acres as a sustainable approach, regardless of if our walls are made of mud or if our food is organic. The whole thing has to begin with land use, and the sustainability and containing begins in India with the containing of the human footprint to a very small area. Therefore, the green belt is as large as it is and the city as compact as it is. Also, we have to avoid the socio-economic inequity that you see everywhere. In Auroville's plan, all of this is considered, and also the fact that Auroville is going to coexist with growing other poles of development in the 5 villages that we share space with. And so there will talk, there won't be any time for that, but at a later session we have to talk about those kind of issues that I have not actually gone into today's presentation. Also, the energy being renewable was planned from day one. Solar and wind were considered from the beginning to be self-sustaining in using the sun's energy, tapping it, etc., was always considered. Regarding water, I'm going to skip this because I will be running out of time. I want to just explain that yes, the water was also planned to collect water for the city, was seen as the biggest challenge. The green belt, okay, I'm not going to have time, but I want to say it was primarily zone agricole. It was meant for agriculture, for growing food for the city, and not only to fill up with forests and wilderness. It had to have a productive role. We will not be able to go into that today. I will now just mention something about the participatory approach. You know, this is something like a bit difficult for me to discuss, perhaps in the context of Auroville, but I have often wondered if the mother had considered participatory design or only participatory building, because she valued the architect's role. She wanted to have a chief architect. She did not, we all know what she achieved and how meticulously she wanted the architect to make all decisions to set a very high design standard already when she envisioned Golconda and brought in Antonin Raymond all the way from Japan to produce this kind of building for her sadhaks. Similarly, Rogier had also spoken about that in 1968, that there was no intention to build arbitrarily. And there was a 30 square meter per person definition and so many other things that have put the focus on collective living in Auroville throughout, rather than on the individual. And also, I found that the mother, in fact, I found no instance of design consultation with Auroville residents during the time where Rogier and the mother worked while she was still there. These plans used to not be shown for residents' feedback and so on. In fact, on the contrary, I found there was a message to the architects and engineers that they are not here to discuss a project. You are here to build the city. I know it's kind of probably difficult to bring this kind of discussion up in such a forum, but I'm sharing with you the questions I used to have when I lived in Auroville and saw contradictions between what I thought was envisaged and what was actually happening. So also, the mother talked a lot about wanting to build the city first and then to see things afterwards. She created Oro model for the people to live so that the virgin land will not be ruined by everybody's personal agenda. So anyway, this is to recall. I just want to show you a few glimpses now so that for those of you who don't know my involvement, I would like to share that I came in 1990. I worked with Roger from right in the beginning. You see Anbu, who is now in TDC. We used to all work together with Roger and Jacqueline. This is in 1996. Later you see there is also Sonali, Louis Cohen. We were working on the line of force already when my office moved from Bharat Niwas to Oralek. And I was also part of the team who produced the Perspective Plan 2025. It was in 1999 that we did it. But the Perspective Plan has only defined land use. We were much more advanced than what we showed in the Perspective Plan. And we did it because in the series of legal documents, Perspective Plan is the first step. And there we only defined land use and some other densities, etc. And we did only that much, although way more was defined. I continued working with Roger until he passed away in 2008 in France, as well as in Auroville, Vastu Shuttle. He gave me more and more responsibility. Here we are working on the city center. I also authored his monograph 2009, just a year after he passed away, although we had worked on the book already together, because I felt knowing more about Roger's process and work would really benefit all of us. I strongly recommend that we try to understand who has designed our city, and we will be very fascinated at the vision that he has brought down. I'm writing a second book, which I hope to release shortly, on Roger Anger's visions for urbanism. And then I continued, there's no time to show this, but I'm just going to give you a glimpse, and maybe we can talk each of these things later. I had produced the city center plans while Roger was still there under his guidance, and we had started various things. Helmut had brought this kind of a sketch from Billinger about the mobility, but also we have checked with other people like Jan Gale, how much is how much is walkable, etc. And we had produced a city plan. I would like to particularly draw your attention to the dark green areas. There is while you try to right now the crown topic is hot. I want to say, please look at the crown topic alongside the green network of bicycle paths that are planned for Auroville. Each and every place can be arrived at walking and through cycles. The kind of thing that Paul had drawn, the meandering way with skate parks, etc. It's a parallel development inside the city center, just like a smaller inner crown, you can call it. It's a green network space. I think we should be beginning this since 2002. I'm hoping for it. There's no reason why we are not developing it. Hopefully you will do it along with the crown. But also, even though it's a pedestrian city, there was a complex hierarchy of buildings, of streets, their definitions, their characters, what can go in, what can't go in, what are the timings for service deliveries, etc. What are the paved spaces and the hubs within each and every zone. There's a lot of work done. How are the gardens maintained? Who manages, how much can the inhabitants do, what should the city manage, So parks and gardens are also defined. And the quality of circulation, the bicycle paths I spoke about, ready to realize. There's a toy train conceived for the cultural zone for the children to go to school after the crown, where adults are not encouraged to enter there. So, all this has been conceived in great detail. Also the densities and space calculations. One interesting thing I can share with you is that the vocational training center, because we are not developing in a planned manner, there are some zones we have not even begun, such as the vocational training zone for our youth. In fact, perhaps It is a topic to take up now that has been also planned with some amount of residences. I hope this is a very timely moment to begin developing very important facilities for the youth so that they will retain the interest to live in Auroville, and whatever they find falling short can be provided here. There's so much space reserved for them. And for us to interact with them, okay? So some more images to show you the detailed amount of work done and all the things that were calculated, what type of gardens were planned in the habitat areas. Even some buildings were detailed, such as the town hall, the main town hall that has not yet been built, that was also detailed and designed in great detail. So there's a lot of work that happened, including a couple of lines of force. This is the lowest density line of force that we had taken up near the solar kitchen, and how it interacts with the low density structures, and what kind of horizontal circulations will be enabled, what kind of neighborhood it can create, and how inspirations from Venice and other pedestrian cities like Bologna were taken to understand how the crown could be. There is no time for me in today's presentation to talk about the crown, but there's a lot of studies that were done, and a lot of what you would like to have are actually already contained in the plan. I think I really look forward to the outcome of the rest of the dream weaving workshop. But yeah, there are a lot of old cities like Jaisalmer, old Ahmedabad, old Delhi, where some of those same principles of urban design have been also tested. Like European cities that are now going, shunning the car and going for bicycles, and even in India, pedestrian ways are being separated inside green corridors. These kind of things can be so much better if we don't first build the problem and then have to fix it. If we directly build a totally new situation, then the pedestrian life will be central to Auroville. It will not be added somehow inside a car life, okay? And bicycles don't have to only cycle along roads, and also the people who jog don't have to go there if we develop the green network. So a couple of glimpses of the line of goodwill that we've been working on since many years, but more concretely since 2017, when a group of people realized that we do need an urgent plan to manage the visitors who come to Auroville. This is the area where visitor center is located at the bottom. And this one development, 800-meter long, if you put in an 800-meter long infrastructure, you don't need to cut any trees much. You don't have to. If you build only this one line of 800 meters, you will be able to accommodate 8,000 people from ground floor up until 18 stories, but also manage the visitors' traffic to Matri Mandir and all the facilities, including public transport. So Roger had given us a lot of inspiration for that, and we did lots of work over the years to understand the massing. I have also consulted with Jan Gale, who many architects here know. He came to our guest critic when we worked on this project in Stuttgart, where I was a guest professor, and then at Yale University, where I was a guest professor in 2020. And recently I produced a new model for the line of goodwill, integrating it with the low-rise developments to explain how the base of 3 or 4 stories could work, to not have an abrupt tower sitting in the middle of low-rise like in most cities. There are so many interesting pathways planned and cycle paths of this kind of nature that are supposed to cross the line of goodwill. And the crown pedestrian pathway, to some extent, sometimes be also on the first floor, like the High Line in New York. So, these are studies that I've been doing. I'm just giving you a glimpse of it, so that when you will give me maybe some time in the future, I will be able to explain each of these projects. This is a 1:50 scale, 18-meter long model of the line of goodwill that we recently built and exhibited in Louisiana Museum of Modern Art, where this room was called Co-Creation, talking about collaboration with previous generations and future generations. That's why the housing projects are mostly built by my students from Yale University, ADK Denmark, and Fachhochschule Potsdam, where I now teach. And in the background you will see We have explained how it will work on the ground level in the context of Matri Mandir, and also what one-to-one scale, what the new facade could look like of this kind of building. Most important is the human scale is retained. When you go inside these spaces, they look very humane. They don't look like towers. That's the most important thing. And all the green technologies are incorporated in the ideas for the facade. The pink one is a power generating paint. There are solar cells, recycled denim, urban farming, and all sorts of things incorporated. For the phasing, if we build the city center, the residential sector 1 and 2, which is detailed, and the line of goodwill, we will reach 20,000 population without developing any other area, just concentrating on the parts I have highlighted. We would have 20,000 people, and this is what we suggest in the first phase, and along with the green network, which should be done straight away, the whole green network.
And Vama, do you want to give some time for questions?
Yes, okay, I will leave this out. I was talking about patchy development and the consequence of non-planning. I'll just conclude. Let's avoid that. And I want to explain that organic growth will enhance our individuality and differences, and planned approach will enhance our collective life and unity. And the city is our common ground. I would like to conclude with the message that Auroville is an ambitious project, and let's make her ambition our ambition. Let's honor the promises made and agreements, and remember that the best way to predict the future is to design it. I would like to end also with this last slide saying that let's take the urban design of Auroville further, because first of all, because this is what was envisioned. Secondly, because this is what we promised. And thirdly, because it remains relevant for the future and is an inspirational example of integrated planning with a high standard of design. The proof of this relevance is through the numbers of people that it has attracted over the years, and the steady donors who continue to support Auroville to manifest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anupama. I'm sorry you won't see the audience very much. That's mostly the best I can do. We have 10 minutes for questions, guys. So I think we're gonna take 2 questions, if that's okay with everybody. I mean, even if it's not, by the way. So make your question very interesting. Who's up for the challenge?
Comments okay, or?
Okay, and then you can send her by email, I guess, and Pama, if you're open to receive emails from the participants.
Sure.
Okay. Come on.
No questions? Nice.
Hi, Anupama. Thank you. My question is that you spoke about those who are interested in sustainability. I am interested in that as an architect. I think that's also the need of the hour. Why has the geology of Auroville, the topography is like a ridge, and there are 3 main watersheds that it comprises. Why has that, you have worked on it so long, have you tried to incorporate that into the design? And the waterways, you didn't have much time to speak on that, but the way the water will flow, because rainwater is the main source, have you been able to somehow incorporate that? Or have you thought about that?
So yes, first and foremost, it began with identifying that water is going to be a big problem already in 65, and it was always, water harvesting was always targeted, but for up until, I think it was in 2002 when we completed Asia Urbs, we did not have detailed surveys. We knew through Auroville's bunding experience, and we, based on that book called Dying Wisdom, in fact, we should bring Raman into this forum because he knows about all the watersheds. The local people knew about the way the water catchment worked in Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is a place where there's a very good legacy for water harvesting in all its various tanks. So most of the soil erosion, most of the other ditches that happened on account of soil erosion that was not being prevented in lands that were acquired. When Auroville began, the catchment areas and the Irumbai Lake and the Quillapalem catchment area were the principal ones. I don't want to make it lengthy, but after we got this detailed data, we had Harald Kraft working on the whole plan for the city, including water levels for every plinth, water drainage of the city, and there was a detailed plan made. And a lot of people who are worrying about, the water catchment areas, first of all, for small ditches, you can always have a sluice, that is easy to solve. The other way to solve is some of the ditches or ravines. Not all of them are canyons that we call canyons, frankly. There are water erosion gaps, so these have to be allowed. And yes, this has been permitted. There are many bridges and there are many. You see the first city center plan, the Galaxy model, it's full of waterways. There is an interlinkage of waters that flow throughout the city. And it's very important on a city level we cannot just, we have to have a planned management of water, not just give too much importance to the way out of erosion continuously water is being collected randomly where it falls due to other people not taking care of water runoff. In the future city, there will be no runoff of water that is not managed. I could do a separate session, sorry, there's so much, I don't know how to give a smaller answer.
No, thank you, it's great. So, Omar?
So you guys, can I comment or I can only have one question? Go ahead. So there are few things that I feel like, especially for the DreamWeaving team, I feel like needing to comment. First of all, I fully agree with the need of compactness, and I think there is almost an agreement today between planners that compactness is of highest value and urban fabric. I think I just have to register my disagreement of any comparison between Auroville and a city like Chandigarh or Brasilia, because they belong to completely different eras. One belongs to the modernist era, where another one is late modernism, coming closer to a different era. So this is the modernist era all the focus was mostly on vehicular movement and full separation between passages for cars and buildings, and then we started criticizing this by going to an urban fabric. So they don't belong to the same time to see them in this way. But interestingly, we are turning back in a way, because while the original model of Auroville was all about the compactness and the fabric, we are now more focused on streets and roads, and then somehow we are actually making something almost against what was intentionally planned. And now the issue of, and this is I think very important to those who are working on the DreamWeaving, because the issue of the mass model, is it conceptual or not? Please, if we bring the mass model again, I can have some questions. Where are the edges between one plotter and another, or one module and another? What are the function of each one of them? Everyone will have a different steward, everyone will have a different function. The building has to take shape in relation to its function. So it's very difficult to see this as a finished or detailed work. Where are the uses, the function, the question about the water, the canyons? We have seen in the previous presentation how complex the water situation is, and how can we see a plan without the canyon. The sun on the crown is changing all the time, because you have east, west, north, south, how we are reacting to this. And I think this is part of the grounding and the work of the DreamWeaving. The air, the spinning of the air coming from all the galaxy, of all the lines of forces, they are coming in different directions in the crown, very difficult. How to deal with all of this, and finally all the systems, how the systems connect. So I think the danger of feeling that this is a finished work is to go and make roads before all of these studies. And maybe the job of the DREAMWEAVING team is to go through all of these layers and study them. Yeah. Thank you.
May I just add to that, Omar? One of the things I would like to say, because I have not presented much about the Crown, the thing is that maybe there is a fear about the Crown Road because of the way the Crown has been executed up to now. It is not exactly how it was conceived, you know, like the way when the solar kitchen happened and Arca and the Unity Pavilion and Savitri Bhavan, etc. You know, these buildings are, if we really understand the Crown as it was envisaged in the galaxy, there is a horizontal circle, like there's a ring-like pedestrian circulation between the buildings, interconnecting the buildings, you know, like for example, from Unity Pavilion to Savitri Bhavan, there would have been an internal street, which is not on the road, or not on the Crown Road, but inside the buildings. The buildings would have to necessarily touch each other. So like the Crown Road, it's a street where there is continuous development. But in Auroville, it is being interpreted as if there are project holders, plots, and all that. So the buildings have faced the Crown Road as if that there is not also the secondary internal way, which is almost more important for the pedestrian. As a result, the exact road as it was built with that island over there in front of Solar Kitchen, it all recalls the conventional road and not the public transport narrows, way and the intimate walkways that are planned inside it. And I think therefore people are reading the future of Auroville based on what has been built so far, but it's not quite like how it was conceived. That's what I would like to add. It was not as if that the Crown buildings happened as per Roger's wish for the Crown, or sort of what he envisaged, you know. So I guess we are still not understanding his vision about the Crown.
Thank you, Anupama. So now time is up, and unfortunately we have a few more presentations after you. So we're going to say goodbye, and thank you very much for your time and this last-minute presence of yours. Next, Rajiv, you're coming? Okay. Thank you and goodbye, Anupama. See you soon. And
thank you so much. I look forward to future questions on any other forum.
Yeah, you will have questions by email, very likely.
Yes.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Did you already answer?
I think she had not done anything on it. She's about the legality. I don't see what has been done. There's a lot of people speaking about it, but
On the back seat.
That's how she was talking. Come on.
I think everybody just needed to move like this.
Not first year.
Or it is their time.
Her husband's the same.
No, I don't know what's going on. It's not meant to be a tea break now. No, I think it's tea break, but it says tea break at 5 minutes. It looks like that. Yeah. We'll be able to just get in music.
The stretching break.
All of your medal of patience.
the little breakouts and all.
This time of the year.
Yeah, for us it's all first time experience. Good to know. Good to know. I would say good to know.
I gave it with the thing here, but
Before I could turn back, she's looks like, I'm not sure. किसको mention She has a jacket also somewhere.
normally I carried in a pen drive.
I give her my session. I give her, she called yesterday and she asked me to take a couple of weeks. When they come back for the first session,
Sorry, this turns around.
It's not possible day after at the end.
add it to the thing.
Like a garnish.
Yeah, it's like a good
It's very ironical how
I think that may
the
be easier, isn't it?
bioclimatic as the garnishing. That
So
will
where do
become
I
like
put
the
this one?
modernist buildings.
Okay, I say I'll go quickly. That's it. Now you just
No, I didn't know the view of the 16.7 meter, like that measurement.
I can also fix it with this.
That's why I really wanted to go 16.7 meter. Unusual say that their wall measurements. Everything is done. Everything is done. You got it. Yeah. Only the first few minutes was yeah. I thought it's interesting to know, of course, like
No, but it sounded like there is a design already there. Why not?
no, but the city center is published now.
Can you hold out?
मध्येच गायब का झाली झोपायला गेली तू
मला घेऊन नाही झाला बोललो आणि
स्वतःचं प्रेझेंटेशन That's what I mean, for me that was much louder than the Auroville.
I said give me the last round, then I can carry on talking.
स्वतःचं तुम्ही बघितलंच मी बाहेरच होतो
No one will wait for tomorrow.
कसं असं जेव्हा बकवास करते सगळ्यांसमोर आणि ह्या सगळ्या लहान मुलींना आवडलं असतं आवडलं त्यामुळे आम्हाला कळलं कोण होते ते या
triangle there. जाऊ दे राहते.
Thank you.
You want to stay that side if I say, oh, I have to go. Between us? Or yeah, because of this mic.
Yeah, you can stay as much as you can before the...
I can go there.
Everybody's in. We start. Good afternoon. My name is Lalit. I'm just introducing at this point in time Rajiv. Is there or not? You can hear me? All right. So Rajiv Katparia is an eminent architect and urban designer. He is a partner in Vastu Shilpa consultant from Ahmedabad, which is also the office. Another partner is our well-known and esteemed Mr. B.V. Doshi, who has also won recently both Padma Bhushan as well as Pritzker Award and also Reba Gold Medal very recently. So Rajiv has graduated from Chandigarh College of Architecture and in the last more than 30 years of practice has done wide-ranging projects, institutional projects, townships, heritage, revitalization, and also especially he has also got award for net zero campus designing, which has included many integrative approaches. And he also got the Prime Minister Award for Hyderabad Charminar precinct for that particular. They also have Vastu Shilpa Foundation. Sometimes we confuse between foundation and consultant. So foundation is a part which is a part of charitable trust. He is a trustee and also former director of that, which has been doing a great amount of work both on research, education, as well as supporting many, including the international studio, Habitat Studio is a part of that. Rajiv has been teaching in different institutes within India and abroad, and also a visiting and honorary professor in many colleges in China, as well as one or two places. Rajiv, in case if I miss out on something, you can simply add. I'm keeping it very informal. I have been knowing Rajiv personally, so personal part is me and Shailaja, we met in Doshi's office. That time Rajiv was also, that's not that he's witness to anything, but he was there. We used him once, which I know very well personally. There used to be a drive-in theater next to Mr. Doshi's office. So there was not one time entry was not possible for people to walk in. You have to have car to go inside. He was coming out of the office, so we requested him, you just take us in, drop and come out on the other side so that we get an entry into the cinema. And he helped us. So that is one side story which I am aware. Rajiv has been also a personal friend, very, very warm person, and I think his, what I have seen through the discussions and the work, both his professional and ethical commitment to the work ethics and profession, I have found one of the highest, and also very warm person. And he has been associated with Auroville for many, many years. They have been coming also to Auroville, and it is for perhaps one more time and opportunity I see that the role they have assumed, they are assuming, is also very vital for us. And he, along with his team and with Mr. Doshi's mentorship and guidance, we have a very good opportunity to create a good platform where we can have opportunity to deliberate all the possible inputs, insights, diverse opinions, and come with something synthesizing which Auroville can make use of. Is this fine? Okay, I should not take more, you should go ahead.
We're done. Thank you, Lalit. I'm going to be keeping you between tea and homegrown cities, so you'll have to give me a little time. My journey with Auroville began actually in 1974. Some of you may not know this. I thought I should bring this up to your attention. The first time I came, I was a first-year student in college. I came to Auroville, and it was barren red land with few structures, few things coming up, very exciting offices, developing things, which I'd never seen that kind of energy and passion. And ever since, well, with the Galaxy plan, you keep going round in circles, so that's what I've been doing, is going around in circles, visiting Auroville, dropping by. Circles sometimes become elliptical, and I've been sort of circulating, around, circumambulating around Auroville. However, I'm going to take you away from Auroville today. I think you've seen a lot of Auroville. You've seen all the issues, the good things, the problems, and there is no end to those. So I'm going to move you away from this to something what I call homegrown cities, because I firmly believe that we have to find our own path. I think that was the message that comes from Sri Aurobindo or from the mother, that we have to find our own path, which is local to us, indigenous to us. I think there are many, many examples we see around the world, and everybody comes and says, I want this and I want that. And I don't think that's the way to go. I think you have to search within and find out. So I'm going to share with you 4 projects. I call them projects, but they're learning experiences along that. Just to give you a sense of how we approach things. And it'll give you some clues to the kinds of concerns that we have, so that when we are collaborating, you know a little bit about me, and I'll get to know a little bit about you as we go along. So with that, I'll start on homegrown cities. And of course, I like to show this because the colors on our trucks and every state represented there, and then of course this overstuffed bundle. So there is a structure and there is this looseness of accommodating things. How do we fit it in becomes an important part of our urbanism. And then of course I look at this. This gentleman was somebody who I met right in front of the gate of our office. And I discussed, this is many years ago. This is when mobile phones were becoming ubiquitous and people, everybody could almost afford them. And there was a time of the missed call, that they would give you the missed call so that he wasn't charged, but you were charged for that. So this guy's a mason. And there are 5 people on this Bajaj scooter. He says, just about 300 meters down the road, there is a chalk. And I used to stand there every morning to be picked up by a contractor to be hired for the day. And ever since I got the mobile phone, I didn't need to stand there, I would be on call. And then because I got successful as a mason, I got a Bajaj scooter, so now I'm mobile, I can do things. So I'm an empowered guy. I mean, the term, I'm putting words in his mouth, but he said, this has changed. So his helper is behind, his wife is in between. There's one child out here, there's another child in between. And the wife goes to all the construction sites because they have to provide proper water and sanitation so she can wash her clothes. The kids have a creche. Things have moved on from the time that, there was no hope. The other one was that I look at the way that we serve our food, and we have a thali. And we have a thali and we say, okay, everything is there on it. You choose. How do you want to mix it? So the choices are with people. How do they want to mix and match things? And I think that's very, very important. So with that, I come to things which I think are important in our cities. If you see, these are, like traces of any city, whether you take Mumbai, Ahmedabad, Pune, and there is the old city of Ahmedabad, which is a density of 800 persons per hectare, 450 years old now. 1 square kilometer if you take and look at the kind of built mass and the porosity within that built mass. And then you start coming to a place called Judge's Bungalow, closer to in the western part of the city, and it comes down to 250 persons per hectare, and the buildings are 12 stories and 15 stories, and yet it is, can you guys see from here? Or am I blocking your view? Maybe I should come a little away. You're okay? All right. So you start seeing the change, and yet the density is going down. So I used to always wonder, how come in 3 stories you could achieve that density which you can't out there? Yes, it's a little overcrowded. There are spaces, the larger spaces, scale of spaces aren't there. But what's wrong with us? I mean, how come 3 stories and 15 stories don't match? And then you come to Prahlad Nagar, and there's only 180 persons per hectare, and then you have these bungalows and things like that. And so these are questions that have fascinated me of how cities grow, change, add. What is the typologies that you pick up? What is it that happens? And the same with Mumbai or Pune. I'm sure some of you are very familiar with that. The key in all of this is, landscape and soil, and as Julio mentioned very importantly, water. These are issues that are connected to the ground. And those have been shaped over, thousands of years. They're not something that you can change easily. You have to start looking at what's beneath the ground, what's the kind of soil, what sits on top of it, how do you collect surface water, underground aquifers, etc. All of that is fixed in our lifetimes for sure. You look at urban forms and layout and you say, well, that's changeable every 500 years or so. Cities will renew themselves. They will change and grow. And when you come to architecture, well, 50 years, it will change. 200 years for sure it will change. What was 2 stories will become 6 stories or 8 stories, and that will keep changing depending on the land pressures or things, or the city would have moved out from there. And then when you look at technology, like this mobile phone, every 6 months is changing. So it's quite easy to change technology. And today when we talk about smart cities, we talk about, a smart city is all about sensors and things. It never talks about people, or whether people should be smart or dumb. But it talks about sensors, and sensor technology is changing all the time. So, artificial intelligence is changing all the time. So that's fairly easy to change and adapt. And then you come to behavior. Human behavior, we are very adaptable. We adapt to any situation. That's the easiest thing to change. Our mindsets may not change, but behavior can certainly change. So I think when we start thinking about cities, we really need to start looking at what has to be guaranteed for generations to come. What has to be done for the next couple of 50 years or 100 years. And then come down to what can be easily changed, and as we go along, we'll change those. I'm going to give you 2 examples from the city of Ahmedabad because I live in Ahmedabad. I'm engaged with the city of Ahmedabad. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the world. We have reached in just 10 years from 6.4 to 8.8 million. And by 2031, we're expecting 10.8 million. So, one side that looks very exciting. It's a growing city. But what happens when you come to growth? You have pollution. It's terrible if you look at the pollution. You have flooding. Cities that, earlier didn't flood, now flood. You have issues of parking. You have issues of exclusion. And then, most importantly, living quality. So, that's basically what one starts looking at. Now, several years ago, one of my thesis students did a thesis on, we have a mechanism called the town planning scheme, or land pooling, as it's commonly called, in Gujarat. It's very successful. As the city grows and more villages come into the fold, people, instead of paying any cash or things for infrastructure, have to surrender their land, 40% of the land. It started at 25, now it's gone to 40%, and 60% of the land is retained with them in their original plot. That 40% is used for infrastructure, roads, hospitals, schools, some for sale, for making money, paying for all of these things. And that sort of comes about, and it's an accepted mechanism because there's no money exchange. But the value of your land goes up 2 to 3 times immediately. And so everybody now believes in it. And in fact, that's something that we should be talking about the green belt, as we'll come to later, because you own only 30% of the land, 70% is not yours. So maybe that's a thought that needs to go for the green belt. The other part that we looked at was that when all this was happening, so I asked a student of mine that why don't you look at natural systems? Because every planner thinks there's a green, a white sheet of paper. The land, it has no value, it has no form, it has nothing that runs off water, there are no trees out there. That's the way planning looks at most plans. And we said that actually if you started reinforcing those and connecting those together, then I think you add value. And that value is, it brings down the cost of infrastructure development, because things that flow by gravity, like stormwater or sewage, etc., that makes eminent sense. If you look at it with public space, because if you have water bodies, well, that's where you want parks and gardens, and you want to make that as the most public space. So you connect all these things together, and the environment is sustained. So these sort of basic connections don't happen in our planning system for some reason. And though it's a very, very simple thing to do, we said we're going to show it to you, we're going to do it. The student sort of did this stuff. I thought he did really well. And then there was a seminar in the Ahmedabad Urban Development Authority, and the Municipal Corporation did a seminar some about 7, 8 years ago. And I showed them this project. And I said, listen, why don't you try this? That time we had a sensible lady who was the municipal commissioner, and she said, oh, that's a great idea. Why don't we try this out? And she said, okay, there is a ring of affordable housing that has been proposed around Ahmedabad. And so as rural areas urbanize, there is affordable housing that is going to come up out here. Why don't you take a chunk of 12 square kilometers out there and work on that? So that's what we did. So the question was, can the existing qualities such as abundance of animals and nature, because these are villages converting, so the villages become the focus of this change. Usually planners look at villages as problems, as aberrations. Let's make a road around it and forget about the village. Now, I think villages are also the first place of urbanization. If you see all urban villages in most cities, that's where migrants come in and find housing out there. That's where they rent housing. And so it gives them an infrastructure which is not affordable by any builder in the city or by any government. And if that doesn't happen, then squatters and slums come up. So this was the kind of anchor that we decided to look at. And new infrastructure and urban functions, and of course, the villages are then seamlessly incorporated in the urban structure. Now, what does increase in quality and lower costs actually mean? The moment you lower these costs, obviously developers say we want to develop this land. So generally it means 20% for roads, stormwater, sewerage, electricity, 5% for open spaces, 15%, and which are never really taken care of, they're just left aside, 15% for amenities, land banks, economically weaker section housing, etc. And what we started looking was not the cost and means, but at the qualities and objectives that we wanted to achieve, which was being able to walk to your local shopping street, being able to go to a park, having nearby access to public transport, having nearby schools and cultural buildings. So this became the basis of looking at how villages were incorporated. So this is Ahmedabad in the center. You can see the light yellow colors, and that is where Ahmedabad is growing. And this ring is an outer ring road, and that dark yellow that you see out there is the 12 square kilometers, which there are about 4 villages in there, so there are 2 adjoining villages, and the city is kind of creeping on this northeast side. Now, when you start looking at this land, you start seeing that the village life centers around the pond. None of these are natural ponds. These are all man-made ponds. For agriculture, you need water. You look at the slopes of the land, you make bunds out there, and as, again, Julio mentioned in the morning, fields, etc., give you clues to how water is percolated in, collected together, and used as a collective effort. And there is also then the public spaces naturally out here, whereas the village chopal sits out there, the banyan tree and the water body, these are all interconnected. Another thing that you find is this ubiquitous high tension lines that cut through our landscape. And when you start looking at them, you can't build under them, but you can use them for open spaces and connections. And then you look at irrigation canals, lakes, local water bodies, and these are also part of the landscape. And if you start looking at them as assets rather than as something to be discarded, then I think you save a lot on infrastructure. And so what we started looking at was public land and the structure, the plot structure, the vegetation structure, the road structure, and the water structure as layers which connect together one on top of the other. The moment you put them together, you get a plan. And that starts changing from the rural plot structures actually very interestingly, and this is, I'll come to the next project, where we found about 1 hectare to about 1 acre or so is a larger, most rural land holdings. If you look at this and you start looking at the urban block, a sensible urban block, that's about the size of it. Not only that, but I'll show you that the trees that are planted on the embankments then become part of your road structure and the side trees for this. So you can combine all of this, and all of this can be used. The canals can be used, the Narmada main canal that passes by, mandatory open spaces. can be under those high tension lines till they disappear, and the reuse of existing routes and roads can be all made together to connect up this new structure that's coming into place rather than as something that is to be added fresh. So that's the this thing, and you can see the yellows, that's all the connections. So ultimately cities are about connections. They're about connections between your movement and your movement through pleasant spaces, through public spaces, through places where you can gather, from places which are next to water bodies, to trees, etc. Now, this drawing shows you, generally the town planning scheme does that. It has one major arterial road, then very small little things, and then little plots of open spaces dispersed in between, because there's a certain percentage that you have to work with of open space. Instead of that, if you concentrate along the water body and put all your open spaces around that, and focus on that, and then use all the plot divisions as they are here to make these roads with the trees, then you preserve that whole thing, and you've got urban blocks of a certain size and scale that work with the city. And then, as I told you about the relationship, we mapped up all the villages in the surrounding areas and their relationship to water and to the public space in between, which was the critical thing as such. And from what we came to was that 20% that was used for roads, we said 15% is actually roads, even though the total amount of connectivity will increase, the percentage of roads will actually decrease in the land that you use. And your pedestrian network becomes, and your gardens become part of that. So you have linear parks, linear connections, which connect up everything together. And all the other things remain the same. So the municipal authorities said, yes, this is a great idea, because they weren't losing any revenues. And they were actually saving on infrastructure. So that's how this came about. And then that's how the plan emerged. And actually you see that the field layouts are very much like urban blocks. They're not very different from that. And then some sort of visualization of how canals could be reused, public spaces, the streets connecting to them, etc., could be connected together, and the larger open spaces would have the taller buildings, and then the rest would sort of take their time to sort of grow. So you get a definition of a city starting from the public spaces and the streets connecting up, and then slowly the land fills up, because it's not going to happen in 2 years or 5 years, it's going to take 50 years. The other project that I wanted to sort of quickly go over was this stretch, which you see from east to west. If north is up, east to west there is an 18-kilometer long metro line that is almost complete now in Ahmedabad. In fact, it passes in front of our office. Huge, this thing, infrastructure that's coming up. Now, the question is that we are very good at putting up metro lines, large projects like this. Every city thinks this is the flavor of the season, and they want metro lines. Whether it connects up anything or not is a different matter. Secondly, most importantly, as we discovered, is that even after you do this, the last mile connectivity is the key for any of such project to be a success. And so if you can't walk to the metro line, then I think you've lost the game. You'll have this metro running empty, not making any money at all, and slowly they'll say, well, this is not successful. You'll also find that if it takes you more than, say, 400 to 600 meters of walking distance, people won't walk. If they have to take their scooter there and find a parking and then take on the metro, it's not going to work. They'll just drive the 6 kilometers, which they would have gone in the metro. So we said that here's a chance to sort of actually subvert the system to make a pedestrian-friendly city. So Ahmedabad has hardly any sidewalks. And we said, here's a chance to make large sidewalks, allow last mile connectivity, and break through the housing societies that they were. So I'll give you an example. This is just in front, close to our office, and if you see this little stretch out here, out of which 87% of the land is private. The green that you see out there is 13%, which is streets and roads cutting through it. So if you look at all the building plots, etc., that's how the town planning schemes came up, and for whatever reason, large chunks were divided, but nobody thought about connectivity. They said, okay, here's a large parcel, and they'd give it to developers to develop it, and you'd get gated societies. What we found very interesting was that people would break the walls, the compound walls, to take a shortcut. And some of them had started allowing that. So we said, why don't we use that as a method and start looking at margins. We waste about 28 to 34% of our land is locked up in margins in buildings in our cities. And it is completely useless. It's if you start quantifying it in terms of money, I think it's a huge amount. There's recently a report in the Times of India for Ahmedabad. There was a SEPT study done that showed how much land you're wasting in your cities. And that's why I come back to what I showed you in the beginning, which was that the density in the old city is so much higher, still being 3 floors, whereas in the new city, it's all locked up into these margins. And so we started looking at that and the common plots. And we started discovering so many ways that you could take private and public lands, connect them together, and have shortcuts making this. Now you start getting the sense of an urban block within that. And then those places, you start putting in public utilities, public amenities, etc., to connect the city. And from that emerges concentrations of public spaces with large housing, this thing remaining untouched. It will change as it changes. So the whole point was that how do you sort of carve out of what exists and see very carefully what you can install inside that and make it public friendly and more porous and permeable. Now I'll come to a competition that we took part in, which we never won, but there was Richard Rogers, who passed away recently. As one of our competitors, we had Fumiko Maki and us participating in this Amravathi, and we put a lot of these ideas that we were talking about into this, and I thought I should share this with you. It was part of a larger master plan of about 276 square kilometers, and we were asked to work on the capital complex of 4 square kilometers within that. That's just about a little short of your city area. This is about 4.9 square kilometers, and this was about 4. And so you see that little strip out there stretching from this major highway coming in here to the Krishna River on the other side. The Krishna River floods, so there's a huge bund. So actually you have no access to the river. It's sort of, there's a huge bund that cuts it off. So the challenge was, how do you connect to the river, not allow the flooding. In fact, you have another problem from the hills. The water flows in towards the center and then comes out, and you have to discharge that water. So there were conflicts in the ways that topography worked. And that's the Krishna River on top. You can see how large it is. And so we looked at 3 things: the sacred, the land, the people. The sacred, I think it's important to anchor people to where they belong. The land, I think it tells you about how the topography, the soils, the species of things that grow on it, and the species that thrive on it. It's mostly agricultural land. And then, of course, people and their culture. So we looked at these 3 things and we said, how do we represent that in a plan? And so the sacred was that if you look at this stretch of land, and you said you had a diagram, like a Kundalini diagram, showing the 7 chakras, dividing up the spaces. And each of these formed a Vastu zone, because this is Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Vastu is very important. So it was part of the brief. We'll come to the question of whether, how much do I believe in that, etc. later on. But we did this zoning, and we had a Vastu person as part of our team to do this. And from that, the idea was that the principal buildings, there were 3 principal buildings: the Secretariat, the Assembly, and the High Court, which forms the entire complex. And then there was housing in between, and there were government offices. This was essentially a government sector as such. And those would stretch in between. And then a carpet of cultural buildings were interspersed in between this that connect these 2 principal anchors as such. And these were various kinds of museums, art galleries, etc. that came up. So this was the sacred part. Then there was, of course, all these existing bunds, and then there were sight lines, and there were connections through that, there were canals through that, and we said, how do we incorporate that? And we started connecting that, existing trees, plantation on site. I know it's not very clear, but bear with me. And then these public spaces that we interspersed were connected through various sight lines and shortcuts through them. So they made a crisscross pattern of connections. And around those, anchored around that, was the dense clusters of built form that surrounded each one. And then they were made more porous, and so to get the kind of numbers that we were looking at to fit into this. And so that was the usage of the land. The third part of the people was 6 clusters of, there were 2 villages adjoining us, 6 clusters of local schools and facilities, which were again where these cultural buildings were happening. So they were clustered around that so that they would be useful, not only during certain specific hours, but they could be used 24/7 by other facilities also. Residential programs so that each one had easy walking access within 5 minutes to any of these facilities. Office programs facing the central open spaces, which are mostly government offices, and then a system of interlinking bazaar streets that tied up this whole thing. And then, of course, inside public bus loop, interlinked with the bazaars, the streets and the public nodes, as well as water-based movement through that, etc. And so this is what really formed the basis of the plan. And that's how the plan sort of emerged, that connecting to the Krishna River, the main public spaces, the main things for the assembly and the secretariat on one side, and the high court on the other side, and the office spaces and housing areas connected in between. Now, what were our concerns when we were looking at this? And that was, one was health and safety, movement efficiency. I mean, we all know that people walking is the most efficient form of non-polluting transport. Cycles, public transport, and last and least is cars. Similarly, fatality rate of accidents, and we are sort of one of the highest in the world now in terms of fatalities of accidents. You go above 30 kilometers, it's still 10%, and after that, it just zooms up. 50 kilometers, your speeds increase. So when we talk about 15 to 25 kilometers, that makes so much sense. And of course, pollution, because the moment you take away this traffic, well, pollution levels start coming down. And the other one was mixed use. So how do you reduce walking distances? How do you make inclusive societies and flexible infill and engaging a program? And so if you see the standards for each of these, whether they're cultural buildings, is the red one, standards for walkability. And what we achieved in Amravati was far more efficient in terms of walkability, that they were much closer, densely packed. And so the build form came something like this, that through your bazaar street, which is this part of it, offices, cultural buildings, dense housing, and then slowly to more private bungalows, etc. As we went to the periphery, the bungalows came in. So, public nodes and culture, as I mentioned, cluster of local amenities along with that, 5 minutes walking distance, public plazas connecting them, bazaar streets connecting it, and then of course future expansion within that, etc. Walkable cities meant confining cars, active street life, defined streets and urban spaces, generous sidewalks, limiting building heights, and pleasant microclimate. These were the criteria that we put up. The question of thinking about density, very often that's the model one in the center. If you totally look at FSI2, you need that much parking and you get a tower, and you get this sort of island around the thing of cars. If you look at setbacks, then you're still covered with cars. And what we were looking at is mixed use and parking all happening underground. Now, we are not talking about a completely car-free city, but we try to confine cars to a certain area. And I'll show you in the thing. And then the kind of densities you achieve compared to, say, Hong Kong or Hyderabad or Washington, I mean, these are figures. That you looked at urban blocks, what is the size of walkable distances? And we are all aware that finally everything has to be scaled to human walking distances. Because I think the moment you exceed that, then you say, I need something to go drive in, something to carry me through. So I'll just sort of quickly go through this. This is the housing and the rest of it. And that shows you what sort of came about as a model. And then, of course, there was the landscape. So we had to take care of water as retention ponds. So instead of doing one retention pond, there's a series of connected water networks that take you through, and that also becomes a mobility corridor for slow-moving boats to go through it. We also get reflective pools, peripheral canals, and then the green, central greens to linear connections and then finally to village buffers and agriculture. And we looked at productive agriculture as part of the plan, not something that you have only trees and forests. You also have productive agriculture as part of the entire plan. And from that came also the private greens. And so you get a very large percentage of green in the thing. And then the different types of roads, connections through bazaars and basement parking for the streets, so that they're limited to this bazaar street and the rest of the parking actually goes underground. And of course, not only cycle tracks along the streets, but also within the green spaces. And then there's the citywide network of MRTS, the metro rail, as well as the bus transport, and a loop bus that went around this, 4 kilometers length. Okay, these are figures I don't think you need to worry about. Then the question of energy, and the energy thing was we were looking at localized infrastructure. So we looked at a certain population threshold of about 20 to 25,000 people in each cluster and saying that, okay, what is the energy needs? How can you treat for water? Connected through this air conditioning, as well as providing electricity at a local level by using the waste that is being generated by the town, as well as borrowing all the rural things that come in to use that as gasifiers to run the electricity grid. So instead of having thermal power, we were saying natural gas and solar PV was the way to go eventually. And these were connected to also water reduction. So how do you collect rainwater, low flow, and I have calculations for all of this. And I think these are common things, but to put them into one project and do that is, I think, the important part. Same with waste, solid waste. And then cooling as such. So what kinds of turbines, etc., we could combine. These are all worked out with this. And a water balance of how much rainfall, rainwater harvesting from different surfaces that we do, different levels of treatment for each one of that connected to this, and reuse, of course, of your wastewater, as you mentioned in the morning again, using that connected to it as a complete grid. And this sort of gives you a comparison of what the Amravati Capital Precinct, which is this part of it, compares to the central vista that's being done in Delhi, and the Washington Mall, and Paris, the Champs-Élysées, and of course the Jaipur Old City, if you look at that, just as a comparison of densities, open spaces, a comparison of them. And so these are some images which I think just give you a sense of the city. And so parks, gardens within the city with the built form connected to it, sort of flowing into each other, not isolated little pockets, but flowing together. I think the important part that I'm trying to make is that. And even when you talk about administration, you talk about places of protest and revolt in between them, so that there is space for everybody and every opinion. And finally, I end up with this beautiful miniature which Mr. Doshi did, connected to this, and this actually was in a temple. So that Kundalini diagram didn't just come out of nowhere, it actually came from something. I'll come to the last thing is Nalanda University, which we are in the process of completing, which is about 455 acres. But there actually we are implementing all of this. As we talk, all of this is actually happening. So whether it's water or it is to do with energy, all of these, I'm saying, can be done. And at scales which are fairly large, which can be upscaled easily. This, I'm sure you're all familiar with. If not, actually, you visited this place. And this was the inspiration for the kind of architecture that sort of manifested itself. But I don't think it's about the architecture, it's about the fact that ruins allow you this latitude to imagine any possibility. And each one has their own way of looking at ruins. And so, everybody finds their own little way of connecting to what is there. So when we started, we had this strange piece of land which goes, and I'll show that to you a little clearly afterwards. And the other one was this area gets a lot of rainfall and it is absolutely flatland, it floods. And the general way, if you look at traditional villages, you excavate the earth, make a pond to collect the waters for the rest of the year and mount that so that you're protected from floods. And so you get this diagram of how you build. And then of course that water is not only useful for you, but it also has fish in it, it has other kinds of things that are produced out there, and it becomes a part of your life cycle and culture. So this is the land, and you can see there is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 villages that sort of surrounded this piece of land of 455 acres. 2 places the water collects. There is a huge watershed. There's hills on this side, the Rajgir Hills, very famous. The Buddha came and meditated out there, so did Mahavir. So for both the religions, it's a very, very important sacred place. And so you can see the Rajgir Hills in the distance, which make the backdrop from where we enter. And those local water bodies, this is in the summers. This is not after the monsoons, in the summers. So we said that's a symbol of what could happen out here. And then rainfall, runoff generated, soil percolation, evaporation, building roof runoff, paved area runoff. You know, the old city of Ahmedabad has a collection of tanks under each house where the roof water is, you know, collected every season. It used to be used regularly, now less so because there is water on tap, but earlier they depended on that. And so they had to maintain it because it was your water that you were going to be collecting. You had to maintain that roof. Before the monsoon, you cleaned it up. Not only that, but then the streets, because the water would first go into the tanks which were emptied by that time, and it would take a while for those tanks to fill up. So you never had any floods on the streets because you're not releasing that water immediately on the streets. And then the streets were, if you see, are those winding, these things, those are actual water courses or water channels. So therefore, that's why they meandered around and went. And so these were lessons that we said, how do we do that? So all our roof water is being collected in separate tanks and being treated. Water runoffs from the plazas and these things is collected separately, and it's actually if you look at the ahar and pine system in Bihar, how they do agriculture, it's very similar in some ways. So we take ancient wisdom, put it together in contemporary ways, and from that started emerging a plan of how this place could be the focus of this and the water bodies and the connection. And slowly it came to, like our ancient temple tanks, etc. There is a tank in the center, the things move around it, and the water levels change over seasons, they're collected together, and important public buildings happen around it. And so, in 455 acres, we said a 10-minute walking distance from the center to the side is what we should aim for. So, how compact can you make it? How dense can you make it? And so that's how the walkability part came. Then was the water network. So what we finally did was to stop rainwater, flooding. We have these holding tanks in 2 parts and large agricultural holdings which can get flooded in a severe storm. But they also give us the resiliency that when there is a drought, we have excess water. And we use that water to go into the main tank, and that's the water then we consume. So that people are aware that this symbolic tank is also something that you have to take care of, otherwise you will be polluting your own tank. So that became the focus of the university. And then of course, you say if there are waterways, then you should have pedestrian networks and you have green networks around that. And eventually, of course, you need also motorized transport, so you have battery-operated golf cart-like buses. All parking happens on the periphery. You have to come and change. You don't drive in your cars. In the beginning, right now when they've started occupying, obviously they say everything is not in place, so the faculty is going to bring their cars inside. We said, okay, we'll make temporary parking, but eventually they will have to also park on the periphery and move out. So you go in stages as densities grow and things change, you keep changing with the times. But you make provisions for that in the beginning. And then that's how the plan appeared. And that's the hills and the plan, and that's a comparison between Venice at the same scale, Jaipur of the main central part of it, the Forbidden City in Beijing, and this is the Sarkej Rosa tank out there, and these are our tanks. So it's about 2 times that. And then the distances we looked at was 500 meters to 400 meters is the thing. So ancient Nalanda ruins and the sort of cloisters that were there, or the viharas as they're called, and the pathways, all of them in different parts relate to that. And then most importantly was this, that what you excavate, you build out of that. So we are building, I think, one of the largest constructions of almost 2 crore bricks or compressed earth block that's ever being done. It's done mechanically. Both contractors, main contractors, are actually doing this. The other important thing was that 200 villages used to contribute to the required amount of provisions that used to sustain this ancient Mahavihara. And we said, can we give back? And so when we looked at the cycle of resources and a net zero campus, we said, if we look at this, that you produce power by biomass, so whether it is to do with agriculture, crop residues, sewage, municipal solid waste, animal residues, industrial residues, forestry, crops and residues, you get your energy and water from there. You get some photovoltaics, but that, in the way that we look at cooling, because that consumes 60% of your energy, that if you can use that heat, this thing exchange between that, then I think it becomes even more productive. And so therefore, instead of talking about high tech, we're talking about cow tech. And that's what we're trying to sort of achieve out here. And I think if that works, then I think we have an alternative source of energy. Bihar is power deficient, so even if you say you exchange with the grid, that's not possible. The other thing, and I think we're running out of time, so I'll run through this. This is the ancient ruins, and you have these serrated edges. And so our ruins of the buildings came from that, a language of buildings that came through service areas which make the periphery, climate towers that bring in cooling into it and collect the water, and then classrooms that mushroom out, and we call them the learning towers. And then the walls are made of service buildings which take up all different kinds of forms, so they start from the same structure. And there's an advantage to that. So the outside temperature cools down, this breaks down the thing, and inside you can get about 32 degrees Celsius because it's shaded, like a veranda. And so you have to go from 32 to 24, not from 45 to 24, so you save on energy. And that, of course, is symbolic too, because if you look at this, this is like a stupa, or the Buddha in meditation as the stupa is actually. And from that comes a series of buildings that emerge out of that. And from the model, we came to the actual construction. So the first convocation, the brick was, we gave actually as a souvenir the brick from the site to the President of India then, and the next president standing next to him. That's, of course, Professor Amartya Sen, who was the first chancellor. And then construction started. That's what you see is a mixture of burnt brick, which is the red one, and then you see the brown, that is all compressed earth block. Taken out from these lakes, which were made, these are all our construction water came out of that. We have no bore wells. We are not boring any water from the ground, from the aquifer below. That sort of shows you the brick making system. It's automated, tested in all kinds of conditions to make sure that it works. And you know the government is very, very fussy about the way that they look at all of this to approve it. That's the more completed buildings, as some of them are getting completed. The classrooms coming up, and the stupa, as you can see, being formed, the negative. And then other parts of the infrastructure that goes through it. And finally, that's what it looks like with the lakes. So there are 4 such large lakes, and there are several on the periphery of it which collect water. And this was something that was put up at the Royal Academy of Art in London. There was an exhibition, and this poster, 2 posters were put up there recently. Showed context, excavation, where we made and the material that you got from that, and you collected water in that. So this sort of forms the basis or the underpinning of it. And then life and learning happens because it's a place of learning, and life sort of evolves around that. So with that, we have another one. I have another minute? No. Okay. This is all about water. So that I just wanted to sort of 2 minutes. Okay, you'll excuse me. Otherwise, I won't do your plan. We were asked in 2004 to do a memorial for the earthquake victims of Gujarat's earthquake. This is 2004. I'm still working on completion of the first part because it's been a very difficult project to complete. The basis was simple: plant 1 tree for each victim. When we found out the number of actual victims, there were 13,805 victims. And it was represented for us, the forest represented rebirth, plurality, adaptation, interdependence, evolution, and transformation, and a celebration of life again. Rather than mourn, we said we should celebrate life and the growth of trees. This is the fort and this now becoming the center of Bhujur. Otherwise it was the periphery of the city. The city was on the other side. This is how it is for most of the year. Then, when you're lucky, because you get only 300 mm of rain, even if you do get it, within a few hours, divided over 16 days, this is what happens to it. It transforms. And we said that if you bring water, so they said you'll get a Narmada Canal, let's do the Narmada Canal. We said no. If Dholavira could exist, Harappan civilization could exist, then I think we should look at this. And the journey of each drop of water started. And that time we didn't have digitized ways of modeling this, so we sort of hand drew every drop of water's journey. And instead of one large reservoir, we had many, 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 many reservoirs collecting where the waters coalesced together. And so, instead of a tank, you had many tanks of different sizes that came and collected water. And so you could do them over time, you could phase them out very easily. They were cost effective, they didn't go over 2 meters ever. Normally about 1.5 meters, so they were cheap to do. And we decided to do them out of gabions. So you fill the local boulders into by local labor, and you make these leaking reservoirs. So it collects the water because otherwise it would just sort of inundate the rock and sort of expose the rock. And we got this. And so that's a celebration of coming collectively. And so that's what it was when it started. That's when the first rains came. And then for some years, it started slowly. You can start seeing downstream of each one as the water goes in, the plants start taking root. Now, that's what we are looking at. So you can see those reservoirs in between, and you can see how the hill is still barren. It has this weed growing on it, which is very difficult to take out and root out of it. But the rest of it, what is called Gando Bawal, as it's called in Gujarat, or is Julius Prosoporus or something, whoever is a...
We have it here also.
Right? It's a wild thing that they got from Australia, and it sort of proliferated and wiped out everything else. And then one part of it is the sun point, and so I end with this picture. Thank you. Okay.
10 minutes for questions. 2 questions.
Oh, the tea is waiting, you know.
Yeah, or less time for tea.
It's time for tea.
No, please, please, please.
No beverages inside the room. Except water, nothing. Yeah? No food either. Thank you very much. Okay. Tell me about it.
They're speechless.
Except him.
As architects from Auroville, we are supposed to weave our ideas together and submit it to Vastu Shilpa Foundation. So from your point of view, if you could provide us like a one-line brief or a design objective which makes perfect sense, that would really help us.
So by the end of these 3 days, I'm sure we'll have more than one line. So let's look for that.
Or
I'm searching as much as you are because I think I'm learning. I don't claim to know enough about the place. And I think it's very kind of you to sort of share whatever you have learned over the years from here with us. And so hopefully by the end, we'll be able to walk together.
Thank you so much. Could you comment a bit about implementation and how you might see implementation in the Auroville context versus perhaps a campus?
When you say implementation of which part, what detail, etc. So I think it's a much more complex question to be taken up as we go along. But yes, definitely that is going to be the key, and I think what we are aiming for here, all these exercises, is to move towards implementation rather than to just talk about things. I think that's a given time frame within which we would like to do this. And so I think we all have to fall in step and move towards that.
Okay, you said only 2 questions, but Mona is next, and then
Julio
Julio.
has a question.
Julio.
We have 5 more minutes.
No, I have a small question. It's about the project in front of your office. So you showed that. How did you manage to carve out those? You know, they were all private spaces, right?
Right. So there are what you call common plots, right? There are margins. So this is entirely out of common plots and margins. And then there are some government lands locked in also. Ownership is by the government. Then there are some institutions which have larger land holdings than they're actually using, which could be borrowed from them, because they're also getting some benefits. So you start, I'll tell you what, when I worked on the Charminar precinct in Hyderabad, it was a real challenge because firstly, that time Chandrababu Naidu was the chief minister, and he engaged us. When it came to actually implementing anything, he said, this is not my constituency, go talk to the AIM, MIM. And so, this gentleman who comes quite often on TV nowadays, he was the person I had to deal with. Okay. The thing that happened was that we discovered, because we walked around every square inch of that space, we understood every nook and cranny that was there. We understood how many schools were there. We found that shop owners had a say in things. We found that schools which were using their playground for a certain amount of time would be willing to time share it with the city to open it up as public spaces for a certain time, as long as they were maintained. So you started making connections. And it's the same way as what I'm talking about, these housing societies. Of course, this thing out there is that now in a 100-meter stretch from the metro rail, they're saying you can get up to FSI 4. So from 1.8, they can go to 4. So that's a big carrot. But to go there, you will end up with these towers. Now, the question is that also all homeowners, etc., in societies are not going to agree. So we said there is a mechanism that, okay, you can't go to 4, but if you have a house there or a plot in a housing society, can you go up more than what you are, because needs change over time. And that itself will allow changes. It doesn't go to 4, but it goes to, say, 2.4 or 2.5. And that itself will bring in change. So, but when you do that reconstitution, you start getting chunks of land which are locked in.
So the trick is to really engage a lot of details. So how much time does it take for this kind of stuff?
Oh,
And how many people do you engage in that?
A lot. I mean, this goes over at least a 6 to 8 month period. So, because there are so many stakeholders, and you go through the government mechanism of how do you deal with stakeholders, etc. When do you have meetings? And then informally also, you know people, builders, house owners, this thing. So you also informally engage with them. That's how you get information to start saying that what is possible.
6 to 8 months is okay compared to our timeline.
Why? Your timelines are very generous. I mean, why?
It's okay. It's very okay.
So I think Julio is going to be the last one, okay?
Thank you. It's interesting, just the timeline you said. And the fact that you have to deal with government agencies. I think, my personal opinion, I'm very much interested in the process. We have to somehow heal a deep wound, which is a structural problem in Auroville, which is lack of institutional memory. It's very common that whatever project which is spanning over a certain amount of time falls on somebody's hands first, but then there is a turnover of people in the administration office or whatever, and somehow the memory is lost. And then again, you have to start again reinventing the wheel. Do you think that this Dreamweavers and your help in this can also touch this subject? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. I'm hoping to. I mean, that's why I'm standing in front of you, and I really feel that it's a great opportunity that David and Omar have initiated this dream weaving. When I saw their first presentation, which David made some time ago when I come last time, I thought it was a great opportunity to engage with the people and collaborate in a meaningful way, because finally ownership has to be local. It cannot be by people who parachute in from outside and then claim to know everything. You don't. And so it's always the case that I think you have to learn to listen. And I'll also just add another caveat to this. The last project that I showed you, I've been working on it for 16 years. It's now reaching completion. Okay, in between, I've gone through 4 chief ministers. It started with our present Prime Minister. It was his dream. It has now moved on through subsequent things. The number of CEOs of the State Disaster Management Authority that's too many to count, that have changed. The people who work with them have changed, and the only constant are the people of Bhuj, which I have had very often had to have public meetings to explain to them, because the last set are not there any longer. So you say, okay, this is what we're... There was a rumor at some point that quarrying was going on the site, that we were taking away stones from there. All kinds of things happen. But I think if we decide that we need to do something, it will happen. And I don't think we should lose hope. See, all of these are things that can be addressed. So all the universities are 8 years, 7 years. It's not something that happens in... I'm on my third chancellor, second vice chancellor. So, yeah. You are the institutional memory. You have to keep it going. All of you are the institutional memory. And you can't forget that. It's your place.
Thank you.
Are we done? Can I have tea?
So guys, next is Tuan. He's going to talk about electricity, energy, distribution. You have tea outside. We are aiming starting at 4:30. Tuan's presentation is going to be a little longer. It's going to be 1 hour and a half. So we should finish by 6.
interpret into expression. That okay. So it does require also maturity.
One, two. Yeah.
rest mode.
You know, I was looking at the retreat, I mean, I was looking at it more at the social scale. I was noticing people were coming out again and sitting with others.
Yes. Oh, you're on mic now.
Oh, be careful. Okay.
Now you can tell the truth.
No.
No.
I thought it was important for our social fabric.
Yes.
But I agree with you, materially.
Materially,
we had the youth, we had the entrepreneurial cell,
the economy, self-supporting.
Economy cell, we had a governance.
Do you want to use this?
Yes.
Yes, so you have a pointer here,
okay.
A red thing. I turn it off, sorry. I'm going to turn it on again. Yep. So you have a pointer here, and down arrow is going to the next.
Okay, and, okay, the pointer is the top, is it?
It's the last one.
Last one, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you? Yeah. Sorry, you cannot stand too close.
You have to be behind the mic, always behind the speaker.
Welcome back, everybody. So the very last session today, topic energy and electrical distribution planning. I'll very briefly, for the people who don't know them, introduce Tuan and Pundaswamy. I'll read this, it sounds quite impressive. Tuan is co-founder of Auroville Consulting, worked for many years on the construction of Matra Mandir, and later founded and managed several community services. He's also a founding member of the Auroville Renewable Energy Group, which later evolved into several Auroville renewable energy units and activities. For 12 years, he held senior management positions in the global renewable energy sector. He also contributes to Auroville's infrastructure planning and development with a focus on energy. Just a quickie, there's a bit of a narrative developed over the last few days or weeks even that we're only 3,000 of us here at present, and we really need to consider the needs of the 47,000 who are still to come. Tuan is one of the few Aurovillians I know of, he came in the very early days, who from the very beginning of being here was thinking about the extra 47,000 in terms of laying the cables and the things like that. So I just wanted to put that in as a note. Pundaswamy has been managing electrical service at Auroville Electrical Service since 1991. Looks after all the electrical needs of Auroville and Aurovillians, including TNEB liaison work for new service connection, line extension, line deviation, transformation, upgradation work, as well as internal and external electrical work. What I remember Punu for and appreciate more than anything, just over 10 years ago we had Cyclone Tane. Those of you who were still here, or were here then, will know that Auroville was devastated. Many trees went down, windmills collapsed. Some houses were badly damaged. And of course the electrical system was hit very, very hard indeed. What I remember was Pundaswamy and his team worked night and day for days to get the connections back. And I think we got the connections back way before almost anybody else in Tamil Nadu. So it just gives a sense of that spirit of service that I think Pundaswamy embodies. So I'm handing it over. They're going to do a soft shoe shuffle. I'm not quite sure how they're going to arrange this between them, but then, yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. You know, today is a very special day. That every year there is one day when the distance between the sun and the earth is the minimum. And it happens to be today. Today, on the 4th of January, we have the minimum distance between the sun and the earth. So it's quite symbolic when we talk on that day about energy. I had once drafted an Auroville energy vision. And the reason that it is still called a draft after I don't know how many years is because I don't know who will approve it, who will make this draft into a permanent document. So probably it will remain a draft for all times to come, but the draft is basically saying that in Auroville, in the context of Auroville, you consume energy for a different purpose than you normally do, that we only consume energy from sustainable sources. And if we, during the process of construction, would consume non-sustainable energy, that we have to compensate for that in the future. And that finally, what really makes Auroville and the world as a whole sustainable is, of course, an integral sustainability and the transformation of matter as per Sri Aurobindo's vision. So what are the objectives of an electrical energy system or systems? You want to have uninterrupted quality electrical energy for everyone. It has to be a mix of sources and preferably distributed geographically. You have to store the energy somewhere. You have to save energy with energy conservation and efficiency measures. You have to have a demand-supply flexibility for the simple reason that the generation of renewable energy will never match exactly the demand, the instantaneous demand. Then you can do it through a system of clusters, and I'm going to explain that system in a moment. And of course, we have to create awareness among our own residents for responsible energy management. And then there is the question of energy budgeting. The strategy would be, if you want to implement those objectives, that you optimize, maximize on-site renewable energy as much as possible, on-site. You install and operate an internal grid so that you can share the renewable energy which is generated in different clusters. You would then have subgrids within that system of Auroville Township. You would have monitoring and reporting systems to know whether it is working and how it is working and how you can improve it. You would have building designs that optimize energy conservation and efficiency. As much as possible, the systems should be modular, especially in a relatively slow-growing township. You want a modular system. And then a distribution backbone to be built ahead of zone and sector development. That is going to be covered more in the second presentation on the distribution. And then, of course, we have this electricity master plan, which is going to be covered in the next presentation. Now, today, we have data pretty reliable of 2019. I'm sorry that we don't have it of 2020 and more 21, but it is not much different. Solar energy would have gone from 6% to probably 10 or 11% now. Grid energy, and then we have wind energy. You know, Auroville Foundation owns a wind turbine which is located near Coimbatore. And the energy from that is being wheeled to Auroville. But as you can see, there is still a long way to go to make it 100% renewable. Now, coming to the cost, when you invest in a solar system or even in a wind energy system or in a biomass system, you have a capital cost which is fixed, and you have very low, relatively speaking, very low maintenance costs because there's no fuel to be fed into the system. So typically today, if you would make a calculation on the cost of solar, it is probably much below 5 rupees. Small scale would be about 450 per kilowatt hours. And if you do a large scale like they do in these utility scale plants, they come even below 3 rupees a kilowatt hour. Versus the grid power that you buy from outside, which is going up typically average by 5% per annum to adjust for the inflation. So you see that delta keeps on increasing, and therefore even financially you can completely justify an investment in renewable energy. There is a worrying trend, to be very frank, in Auroville, that our per capita consumption has increased. From 1,390 kilowatt hours per person in 2012 to almost 2,400 in 2020. Now, there are various factors for that. The scheme where electricity is distributed free has definitely influenced this. There was also some suppressed demand which got fulfilled. But definitely this is not a very good trend. And we should make sure that we do not, that when we have a presentation next year, that the column is still higher, because the idea is not to consume more, but to consume less. So if we want to achieve in Auroville a 100% renewable, zero carbon energy system, how do you do that? The first thing you do is, this is an energy pyramid that we designed a couple of years back for a book called The Source Book for Asia. We designed it in Auroville Consulting, and it has been used by that book. You always have to go through these steps when you look at energy, and these steps are not necessarily done sequentially, they can be done in parallel. So the first is need versus greed. Now, need versus greed is extremely subjective, very subjective. What somebody will consider as greed, somebody else will feel it as a basic need. But I suppose that in this room, we all agree that if you enter in these 5-star hotels and the thermostat, if there is a thermostat, has been set at 80, 90 degrees where you have to wear a sweater, that's not a need. And that's not a greed either, that is just stupidity. Because you don't need 80, 90 degrees centigrade. When you come from outside 35, 36, even bringing it down to 30 or 29 already, you feel better, but it's all about relativity. So that is the first one. The second is conservation. So suppose that we all agree that we need, say, 300 lux to read. Then definitely in the daytime I can read with daylight. I don't close the curtains and then read with an artificial lamp. That is a very basic example of conservation. So conservation means maximum use of the natural resources to fulfill your basic need. Energy efficiency is about, now suppose we agree, and I think we do, that after dark we need lights. Then how can I get my 300 lux in the same example with the minimum amount of energy? That is the subject of energy efficiency. And then comes renewable energy, and then maybe for the time being we still have some fossil fuel, and hopefully in a couple of years from now that last part of the reverse pyramid will be zero. That is what we all should aim for. So this exercise is typically done. And to give you just an example, here we show an energy, 100 units of energy, primary, doesn't matter what it is, 100 tons, 100 kilowatt hours, 100 megawatt, 100 is generated on the left, goes through all sorts of processes, heat becoming mechanical energy becoming electrical energy, transmission, distribution, and finally, we see on the right there, we see a lamp on. And now if we would replace that incandescent lamp with a CFL, not even an LED, that 100 of the first picture becomes 25. So we don't have much control over what happens on the left side, but we have a lot of control over what happens on the right side, that is the demand side. So by simple measures like that, we can make sure that in this example, 100 becomes 25, and that we reduce the dependence on fossil fuel to start with. Now we did in consulting, Auroville Consulting, we did a very interesting exercise, in fact, for the TDC last year, to look at various scenarios of per capita consumption with a growing population. And we arrived at a consensus that this green column is probably a realistic one. Now you will say, yes, but that is higher than the per capita that you showed earlier. Yes, it is higher because we believe there will be more electric mobility. We believe that we have to migrate from the LPG cooking gas bottles to some other cooking methodologies. So if you remove the fossil fuel mobility and replace it with e-mobility and you get rid of the gas bottles, 3,000 kilowatt hours per person seems to be realistic. If that is the case, we have made basically a table where we look at the estimation of megawatts needed of solar energy. So as you can see, when we have 15,000 people, we need 27 megawatt, and when we have 50,000, we need 90 megawatt of solar energy. We have done the same thing for storage. Now storage is actually the missing piece in the puzzle today. Can somebody tell me the energy which is in coal, oil, and gas? Where does that energy come from? Anyone? Any guess? Coal, oil, and gas has energy. Now you know the answer because you were in an earlier workshop. Where does that energy come from? Trees? No. From the sun. So I would request you that from today onwards, you look at coal, oil, and gas just as three big batteries. They're not a source of energy, just like groundwater. In the morning it was explained, groundwater is not a source. The source, if at all there is a source, is rainwater. Same story with energy. The source is the sun, and coal, oil, and gas, through a photosynthesis process, took many, many years, has generated coal, oil, and gas with energy in it. So in fact, the whole energy story is about replacing those three batteries, coal, oil, and gas, with sustainable batteries. Fortunately, we don't have to discuss the source. The source still is the same, the sun. It's the only source. And you know what is nice about that source? It does generation, it does transmission, and it does distribution. When you stick your hand out of the window, you catch solar energy. You don't have to go anywhere. For coal, I have to go to a coal mine, or I have to go to a harbor where the coal is brought. For wind, I have to go to a windy area. But for sun, I don't have to go anywhere. So you can generate solar energy where you need it. You don't need to go to a centralized place and generate it. So we did these calculations. And by the way, storage, sometimes people come to me also and they say, look, Tuman, all the solar energy is very nice, but why are we still connected to the grid? Why can't we just switch off the connection with TNEB? He will also be jobless and be on our own. So then I usually tell these people, have you brought your checkbook? Okay, very good, please sit down. Because we made a calculation that if we go with the present growth of population, we would need by 2025 5.4 megawatt of solar energy capacity. That will cost about 27 crores and will last 20 years, so that is doable. But for 2 days of autonomy, 2 days only, you have to make an investment of 97 crores of storage, and that you have to do every 7-8 years because storage, the batteries don't last. Now, and 2 days of autonomy is not enough because we have, for example, in November, we had this rainy day after rainy day. So you would need at least 5-6 days of storage. So just to give you an illustration that cutting off from the outside grid now would mean incredible investments. So what we are doing is that every financial source that we can find, we push it now into generation of energy, a little bit in storage, but the storage we will do later because we expect also the cost per kilowatt hour to come down in the coming years. But even I would say, even if the cost of storage comes down, I would always recommend to keep connected with the public grid because you will never ever have an exact match between what you generate and what you need. So if you are connected to a wider pool, there is an offset happening at the regional, state, or even national level. So then we said, what are the cost implications? So here you see it with, let us take 15,000 people, 122 crores for solar, and 51 crores for 2-hour backup. By the way, this is only 2-hour backup, not 2 days even. So just to illustrate how expensive storage is as of now. Today, a lead acid battery is costing about 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour. Lithium ion is about 16 to 18. And we are being told that so much of research is going on that lithium ion will probably come below the 10,000 in maybe another 3, 4, 5 years. In that case, storage becomes definitely a more interesting proposition. The area requirement, that's another interesting one. There is an article which came in the Hindu this Sunday, and it is very negative about solar, very negative. But it is negative about, not solar, if you read the article, it is negative about solar on land. In fact, in the last paragraph, he says, do it on rooftops. So when I first read this article, I started reading, I better cancel the presentation for the DREAMWEAVING. But then when I read the article, it says, no, we should do it on roofs. So we calculated what percentage of the Auroville roofs would you need for 100% solar generation with, say, 50,000 population. It is 37.55. So if we would allocate about 40% of our rooftops for solar, and maybe the rest for urban agriculture, then we are done as far as the generation is concerned. So no need to convert agricultural land into solar plants. It's not required at all. And in fact, we have been promoting this rooftop solar since many, many years. I can proudly tell you that our team designed the solar energy policy of Pondicherry completely. We contributed to Tamil Nadu. We wrote something for Orissa. The Delhi policy was written 2/3 by us because we always believed that the future is rooftop solar and not these huge plants. If you take, for example, the 650 megawatt plant of the Adani company in south of Tamil Nadu, if a cloud formation passes over that system, 650 megawatt suddenly becomes maybe 100 megawatt or 50 megawatt, right? Whereas if it is distributed, a cloud over Viluppuram does not mean there is a cloud over Chennai. So you also spread your risk. Another very big advantage of distributed solar is, in the case of centralized solar, suppose the substation near that 650 megawatt of Adani has a problem. So 650 megawatt gets cut off from the grid, but the demand continues. Whereas in rooftop solar, if in a particular street the cable fails or the fuse blows, the generation stops, but also the consumption. So the advantage of distributed solar is that you match always generation with demand, whereas in centralized solar you don't. So we have been very strong proponents of distributed rooftop solar. So what are the other things you have to look at? Flexible loads. You have to be able to meet the flexible load. You can, for example, say, why should a washing machine run in the night? It can run between 10 and 12 or 11 and 2 because there is plenty of solar energy. So those loads which do not depend on a time, you run them when there is solar energy. You don't have that choice in the case of lights. Lights you need in the night, but there are many other things that you can do when the sun is shining. We have already worked with various regulators in the country to get TOD, time of the day tariffs, even for solar, to encourage solar generators to generate the solar when the grid needs it. I have already mentioned transport, cooking, and there are so many other migrations which can happen. Cooling. There is always, air conditioning is always a very hot topic, although it is about cooling. What is our strategy for cooling? There are definitely buildings in Auroville which require cooling. I can think of a health facility, or of a place where people stay who have some, diseases and they have to be taken care of. So we have studied, centralized cooling instead of all these individual air conditioners. And it's not today's topic of this presentation, but it shows some very interesting results. We did in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, we did the first phases of what we have called the smart mini grid. I'm happy to tell you that the Ministry of Power, Government of India, has endorsed this project with a very nice letter and is following the performance of it because they believe this is also the future for most of our cities. So how does this work? You define a cluster. So in this case, this is the town hall cluster. You see the town hall, you see the foundation office, all these buildings. And that cluster, you use the roofs, you put solar on those roofs without worrying whether the building below those panels will absorb that energy or not. Doesn't matter, there's no matching required because the surplus flows into the cluster. Normally when you do individual solar, you have to make sure that you don't produce too much because then you export it and you hardly get anything for it, or too little. Here we don't worry. We just see, okay, you see those roofs, they are fully utilized. Because we didn't have to match the capacity of the solar system with what that particular building happens to be consuming now or in the future. It is cluster-wise done. Now just imagine if you have clusters like this all over Auroville, and you interconnect those clusters, which we are doing now with this almost now famous high-tension ring cable. Then what happens? The instantaneous surplus of the cluster as a whole travels over the ring to other clusters of Auroville which happen to be in deficit. And at any given time of the day, there will be clusters in surplus and there will be clusters in deficit. It will happen once in a million times that one cluster generation matches exactly the demand for maybe 1 or 2 seconds. So by interconnecting clusters with solar and storage, there's also storage in this, you get a very resilient, modular, upgradable, easy maintainable system without using any land, only rooftops. Now this is a very interesting picture. So all these solar systems that have been installed are connected with the Auroville Electrical Service. Prasanna is there, he is monitoring all that. So he can see on his computer, minute by minute, second by second, what is happening with the help of a product which has been developed in Auroville called the Wattmon. So every system has got a Wattmon, and the Wattmons are connected to internet, and the internet is connected to his computer, so he can see what's happening. Now here you see a picture of various clusters. In fact, this is transformer-wise clusters, which is easier for us to. And you see that line below here, this one. Now this is the surplus of that cluster which you just now saw, namely the town hall, generating between what time? Roughly 9:20 and 3:34, more than what it needs. And that energy of town hall, this is a town hall curve, travels to other parts of Auroville, as a result of which the whole curve of the whole of Auroville is almost coming to zero here. Right? So 1, 2, or 3 clusters in surplus compensate for 1, 2, 3 clusters in deficit, and you try to get to zero. But what would you do if you had more storage? Then, suppose, let us put it this way, suppose there are so many clusters in surplus that the total line of the high tension connection, this one, where is it? The yard, this one, suppose that goes below zero. Then you're exporting to the public grid. Now, if you have enough storage in place, you can then trigger storage being charged. And then what you can achieve that these morning peaks and the evening peaks can be flattened. Because when the evening peak starts, you take from the storage that you stored in the daytime, and you say do the same thing in the morning. So then this curve becomes much flatter. This is called peak shaving. Technical term is peak shaving or peak shifting. Peak shifting means that I shift this peak to the daytime by storing. So the combination of distributed solar energy and distributed storage gives us the possibility to A, have a very resilient system, B, to, with storage combined, to shave our peaks, and eventually to come to a net zero when the whole line will be the whole day at zero or just above it. So we have concluded in our team that we can definitely achieve a sustainable energy future. Definitely also with a population of 50,000, just 40% less of the roofs, and some battery storage. What we are doing now in Auroville Electrical Service, Punusamy and his team, they have started a new vertical. And they call it solar energy pool. So what they do is, every time, so we got a grant a few years back from a very helpful company, and with that grant we installed 200 kilowatt of solar. And then what we said was, okay, the energy the payment that normally would have gone to TNB, which is now not going to TNB because we're generating it ourselves, that payment goes into installing more solar and to maintain the 200 kilowatt which already is there. So this 200 already has become 300 without disturbing any cash flow of Auroville. So whatever, if suppose yesterday 100 rupees was going to TNB, now only 90 goes to TNB and the 10 goes to this project. So then you make a self-supporting, sustainable, financially also system where the solar energy keeps on growing. We have calculated that if you start with, say, 100 kilowatt in year 1, you get 3 times that in year 20. So by the time the economic life of the first batch is coming to an end, you have already double of that operating, and that's how you can grow the system very fast. So we have come to the conclusion we can have 100% renewable and zero carbon energy starting from 2025. If we can add this, I said 5.4 megawatt, we have about 500 kilowatt operating, only 10%, so we have to make a lot of effort to put another 5 megawatt of solar and storage, and then we are 100% renewable from that year onwards already. So the question is, are you ready? Omar, ready or not? Huh?
This is the end of the lecture?
Yes.
Yes.
we can do the questions on this part first, if you like, and then Punusami will we do together the distribution part. How are we doing on time? We are doing good or not? Fine. So are there questions about this particular presentation? Yes, Dorle.
You mentioned the wind turbines and that you're wheeling that energy. How does that work? You selling the energy to somewhere and then that money is going into Auroville, or how does that work?
You see, it is a unit called Varuna. I'm not part of that unit, but I know how it works. They have totally 5 wind turbines. One turbine has been transferred to, let us say, the books of the Auroville Foundation in about 7-8 years ago, and that is in wheeling mode. So wheeling mode means that the energy that that wind turbine generates is deducted in kilowatt hours from the bill of Auroville at a high tension connection. So let us give an example. Suppose you consume 1 lakh units and the wind turbine has generated 20,000 units. You get a bill for 1 lakh minus 20,000, minus some wheeling charges, but that's approximate. So that is called the wheeling. What they do with the other turbines, the other 4, of which I think 2 are in Karnataka and 3 in Tamil Nadu, correct? There they sell the power to third parties, and that money they donate to Auroville for electricity. Now you could ask, why are they not wheeling more? The problem is we cannot absorb a second wind turbine. You see, absorbing in the sense, we do not consume enough with the solar that we have now because you cannot do a little bit wheeling. You either wheel or you don't wheel. I mean, you can do partial wheeling, but then they sell the surplus to the teeny bee for a ridiculously low price. So if you do wheeling, you should only do it if you can absorb, say, about 90% or so of that wind turbine generation. So today, Auroville can absorb 1 wind turbine generation and not yet 2. And of course, there is a little bit of a healthy competition going on because the more solar we put, the less room is there for. So there's a nice competition between wind and solar going on right now. But that's basically how the wheeling works.
Okay. So that means actually that the money which is coming from Varuna to pay for the electricity of the Aurovillians is just, it's not green electricity which we're getting, it's just green money. Because the green electricity has already been sold once, you can't sell the same electricity twice.
So exactly. So the 4 turbines of which the energy, Prasanna, if I say anything wrong, you please correct me, because he is the one who knows all the data. The 4 you're selling, no? Yes. Yeah. So the 4 that they are selling the energy of, they get revenue. First they pay maintenance, they have a maintenance contract and other charges, teeny bee, they have to pay the wheeling charges for the other turbine and maybe some grid charges. Yeah, and then the net amount they transfer to the Auroville Unity Fund, and the Auroville Unity Fund credits then everybody with some amount which reduces electricity bill.
No, but my point is it's green money, it's not green electricity.
It
so
is green, yeah. I mean, in fact, the dollar is also green, no? So, no, it's green money if you want to call it green money. I mean, some of us feel, but that we don't want to debate here, but some of us feel that it would. I personally feel that that money which is earned, we should also invest in more renewable energy assets rather than everybody, getting maybe a lower electricity bill, because then you make it self-supporting. But that is a separate topic. We don't want to bring it up here. Yes, please.
I have a small question to that graph that can you go back to
yes.
the graph? It's quite interesting, like how for the 4 substations. What is that peak as? I'm just curious. What is that peak
I think that morning peak, I've also been wondering, is it the water heater peak or what is what peak?
I have a feeling it's Matra Mandir, because I have a feeling that all the sprinklers go on and the lights go on.
It's a combination. It is some pumps are starting, some people are water heating, water heaters are starting.
Not at 4:50 in the morning.
What time? It depends on what time. No, people may have programmed it that it starts at 4:15, so it is ready at 6 o'clock when they want to take a bath. I don't know. But my simple point is this peak is a combination of 2-3 factors. We also have a 9:30 peak. If you see, now of course not because the solar cancels it, but earlier there would be a 9:30-10 peak is when the offices start and the air conditioners are being put on. So in fact, we can have this live. I mean, we don't want to do it now, but we can live see right now what is happening he has access to it. But the evening peak is also quite high, I find. I find for Auroville, the evening peak at 1920, if you see, here is a peak, which is about 300 kilowatt. I find it high. I mean, how steep it goes up. So that is, of course, you're switching on of the lights, and maybe some televisions, and maybe some induction stoves for cooking. So the whole idea is that you want to flatten those peaks. Because don't forget another important detail, you always have to design the capacity of the systems to be able to handle the peak. If you can flatten the peak, all your transformer sizes, cable sizes, switchgear sizes, all can come down, right? So peak shaving is a very important part of the whole story.
It's interesting to see that. You should check out Masterplan if you can reduce that.
Which one, the sprinklers?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
Sprinklers are not very much energy intensive. Anyway.
Yeah, anyway. The other question I had was that solar, what is it? What you fund,
pool.
solar pool. What are your priorities? Like, how do you decide where you're going to put the next?
Oh, it is very simple. They have made a list of all what we call the public buildings first. So Savitri Bhavan, Unity Pavilion, all buildings which are public first. And then some residential buildings have been approached.
Schools.
Schools, everywhere. The priority right now is to put it in the area which is connected to the high tension, our internal grid, for the simple reason because then it can migrate to other parts of Auroville. If you put it on a low tension individual teeny B connection, the surplus goes to teeny B. And the compensation for that is very, very low. So the priority is to put the new solar systems within the city area where we are all connected to one connection which is just behind there. 86, you can see it here, 86. So that it stays within the fence, so to say. A little bit spillover is there. On a few days in the month, you are spilling over to teeny B, right? Or you are trimming it? 20 to 30 units, that's symbolic. So we have a bit of a spillover. But then, of course, when the spillover threatens to become higher, then you put storage. And then instead of spilling it over into the public grid, you spill it over in your own
We also
grid.
start connecting other nodes which are not connected to this.
Now, increasing it, yes.
Yeah. And last question, Punswami, are you going to present how you're phasing out the overhead tension lines from Auroville? Like, you want to change the substations and are you
That's
going
coming
to
in the
present?
next presentation.
Because I'm thinking about also electromagnetic fields.
Yes.
It's good to,
Correct.
reduce that by putting in the ground.
Yes.
And we also don't lose so much land.
Yeah.
Because always there's trees and cutting and pruning and it's a lot of maintenance.
Next presentation, we will show you how this whole overhead jungle has been replaced by an underground system.
You will be so happy to see that.
Yes, I'm waiting for it. I have one here. Don't be too polite, guys.
Thank you. We have already said this among us a few times. There are many similarities between the energy and the water scenario in terms of strategy, in terms of source, in terms of storage. The principles and the mechanisms are very much similar. What is a bit worrying is that increase in consumption. Because I remember a few years ago there was a presentation where it was said it will naturally come down. And I really trusted that that would happen, but actually when I see this graph, it's a bit worrisome. Why? Because if I make a parallel with the water, the moment we will achieve the water security, actually the water abundance, if we put in place certain measure, and then we want to be a beacon for others, then we should always remember that graph should never go increasingly high, but it should be with consciousness of consumption, an example for the others. So it would be very much interesting, in my point of view, but I think also in the collective, to understand if it's possible. What are the mechanisms which are implying that higher consumption? Thank you.
Yeah. So no, I am fully with you, and you have seen it. It's quite. It's almost a doubling from 2012, and definitely, the scheme of free electricity has contributed to this 100%. What happened is people started purchasing air conditioners, which were not always the most efficient ones, right? So that whole scheme we also may have one day to look into. What are the measures? What Auroville Electrical Service already does, if they see a sudden increase in somebody's house or thing, they give them an alert, and in fact, they even go there to find out what's happening. Have they maybe the air conditioner on with the window open or stuff like that. But what I believe, and we worked with Lavinier de Auroville on Sector 1 and Sector 2 when they prepared the DDP, we gave them inputs for an energy strategy where we said you should have an energy budget, like you have a financial budget. How many kilowatt hours per person on average do we want to budget for? It is not that everyone will consume the same amount of energy, but on average. So if you say, for example, that including, what is it called, e-mobility and e-cooking, suppose it comes down to 3,000, because e-cooking is a big ticket item. We never talk about those LPG bottles, but if you start replacing them also, suppose it turns out to be 3,000. I'm not saying it is, but suppose. Then that becomes your energy budget. And then we have to inform the community, listen, we are going to generate a population multiplied by 3,000, not 1 kilowatt hour more, right? And then we have to do load shedding if it goes above. It has to be a collective awareness campaign. You can today, you can get equipment which is super efficient, and sometimes people have, are against, not against, but hesitate to do it because the upfront capital cost is sometimes a bit more. But in most cases, you can demonstrate within 2-3 years that extra capital cost is already paid back. So more awareness have to be done. And as far as the DDPs are concerned, my recommendation would be to include in the DDPs an energy strategy and an energy budget. And then maybe the target can be achieved. This is not a good trend at all, this increasing. Yes, please.
So I think one more question, and then we're going to go to the other presentation. Yes. Okay.
After Manu, important.
Okay. So then two, because Omar insists.
So thank you, Tuan, for that presentation full of numbers. One thought is that, is it possible to also think of distributed production of power? Like not totally put all our eggs in solar, but when solar goes down, can we also think of some push button technologies like biomass generation, biogas generation?
Yes.
So they can dampen the peak.
In the more detailed document of which this is a summary, we have written that there should be diversification of sources as well. Solar is an easy one to do because you have rooftop, but definitely biomass should be another one. We have even looked at micro wind for Auroville. But it is a border case because you have a bit of wind typically in the evenings, that sea breeze, but it does not make a case yet to do in a big way micro wind. There is now an American company that is in touch with one of our colleagues who says, you know, I will at my cost demonstrate that it will work. So if that person is still up to it, we will put a few micro wind turbines and show. But definitely it has to be diversified. You can't put all your eggs in one basket, even if that basket is solar. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Tuan, for the presentation. I told you I have very little knowledge of the meticulous data of electricity, but the concept of clustering is honestly very sound to me because in the area of bioclimatic design, this is where the world is going today. We recognize that thinking of building by building doesn't work much. We find that some buildings in one cluster generate heat while other buildings need heat, and then becomes how. And I remember some professor was telling, imagine all of this heat coming from the metro stations in London, there is a way to use it. So this is very sound to me. So now the main question is, now you have 22 architects who are working on DREAMWEAVING for the Crown. How this can be clustered? Do you see it as one cluster, or you see it as there's a specific range of distance that has to be respected? And then if you are giving recommendations, what kind of, the architects are working on the level of geometry and form, there is any recommendation that they could think, this is what we call integrative design, that the engineers and the architects are since day one interacting. Are there any recommendations that you can, in which they can implement? Yeah.
No, very good. So you will see in the next presentation that when the electricity master plan was prepared, we instructed the consultant, the development consultants in Calcutta, we don't want any transformer size above 250 kVA. See, there is always a trend to put big transformers and fewer of them. We said, no, we want to penetrate into the urban fabric with high tension more to have long-term benefit of reduced energy losses and voltage drops. And they accepted that. So one way to do it is at transformer level. So a transformer is a cluster. You could also say a transformer have 3 clusters and then integrate at switchboard level. The nice thing about it is you can be as flexible as you want to be. You can have a small cluster, big cluster, medium cluster. You can have 1 transformer is 1 cluster. You can have 2 transformers as a cluster. It's just a question of basic engineering. So the answer is the detailed development planners can just inform the technical team how they want to do the planning, and it can adapt to it. It can be, for example, in this case, I think it is on 1 transformer, am I correct? Yeah. So in this case, it is cluster-wise, transformer-wise in the town hall. But you could, if you have a larger area where 1 transformer for the time being, till the density improves, is having long cable lengths, you could say, okay, I put a cluster here and I put a cluster there. The idea is that, you see, for years together, in workshops like this, there used to be always 2 camps. So one camp used to say centralized, and the other camp would say decentralized. And they would also sit more or less like this, one on the left and one on the right. So we have thrown both of these words out of the window long ago. It is neither centralized nor it is decentralized. It is distributed but connected. Distributed but connected. And the same thing with water. You would harvest the water maybe in many, many points, but you want to connect. So we don't talk anymore in terms of centralized versus decentralized, distributed and connected.
So we are going to the next presentation now.
You do the HD, I will do the LT. How are we doing on time, by the way? Are we okay? Or?
So it's now 5:20 almost.
So we were supposed to be 1.5 hours, right? Totally.
Yeah, so you're supposed to be done by 6.
Okay. Now we will do that. Faster. Faster.
So you have 40-something minutes.
Yeah. Okay, we can do this. See, basically, in the early days of Auroville, we were even less dense than we are today. Very low density, a building here, a building there, a community here, a community there. And there was never any money for infrastructure. So what was the simple thing to do? You asked the TNEB to bring an overhead line. Those overhead lines for certain categories would be free also. If you had more than 2 connections, the overhead line would come for free. So you take, for example, Sincerity community, there were 4 houses, you apply for 3 connections and they bring all the poles free of cost. We knew, we both knew that this cannot last very long. This has to stop because it became a spaghetti. Or what would be another, in your menu, what would be the equivalent to spaghetti? In Egypt, what is the equivalent to? Spaghetti. Spaghetti, also spaghetti. So it became spaghetti without a very good sauce, by the way. So we said there was an organic, unplanned growth. Just, and quite frankly, the architects also, they said, I don't want to hear about it. Just give me a water connection. I don't care from where. Give me an electrical connection. I don't care from where. And give me a telephone connection. I don't care from where. That was the system in those days.
Not only that, they were not planning at all.
No, the plan was for a particular building.
For the particular building only, and then once the building is completed, they will come to me for getting a connection. They will not even tell us that the building is going to come in this area, and you have to plan for a overhead line or a TNEB connection. Totally, the building will be totally completed. Then they will come for an electric connection. So we have to apply and then see with the TNEB how to bring the overhead line to that location.
So it became something like this. This is still a mild version. A complete web of lines going, high tension line, low tension lines. There were also earlier telephone lines. The BSNL was having overhead lines for every telephone, 2 GA wires. So if you have 20 telephone lines, you have 40 wires. It was a complete mess. The problem with overhead lines also is, let us say there is a overhead line going from here to there to an Auroville building. And a private party who owns the land just 200 meters away says, hey, the line has come pretty close now I also apply. Even if tomorrow we would decide to get rid of the overhead lines, because of that one private party, you can't remove it.
The entire transformer cannot be removed.
Transformer, high tension line cannot be removed for just one party. So both of us saw this coming quite some time ago. We said, this is going in the wrong direction completely. We have to do something about it. This was what happened after Thane. Already was mentioned in the introduction. 150 poles came down, 3 transformer structures. And we were in the field for 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
To put it. This happened with overhead lines. No? They just snapped like twigs. We got help from a lot of people. In fact, a friend of mine who was working in Kalpakam, he sent 2 JCBs, and we got equipment from so many people. We worked with the TNB closely together. We did also some work outside of Auroville with TNB to get the whole region up.
We even got the chairman of Tamil Nadu Electricity Board to help us.
Yes, correct.
He came here, I guess.
He came here. So that vision I've already shared with you, so we don't have to repeat. A quick reminder for, especially for Omar, that in electricity, you see power, P, is voltage multiplied by current. P is V into I. So a particular quantity of electricity you can transfer from A to B either with a high voltage or a low current, or a high current and a low voltage. So what is typically done is that when you transport over a long distance, which is called transmission, you have it at a higher voltage and a lower current, because high current means big conductors, and the losses in a cable or a line are I square, current squared, multiplied by the resistance. So if you have double the current, you have 4 times the losses. So normally when you transport over a longer distance, you like to have the voltage to be high. And that's why transmission lines are 230 kilovolts, 110, 400. Then you have 3311 distribution, and finally you have what you get in your plug, 230 volts. So that's why now these are the standard voltages normally used in India, which are 630, 400, 230, 110. HT is 66, 33, 11. And then the LT is, of course, 230 single phase and 415 three phase. The last one is what you are dealing with when you are in your house. The problem that we have in this particular area is that there is a voltage which is not standard, used by the TNB, which is 22,000 volts, 22 kV.
Non-standard voltage.
Non-standard. Pondicherry also had it. They have replaced most of it with 11. Jipma still has it. Mutialpet is in the process of being changed. So when you have a 22 kilovolt system, when you purchase a 22 kilovolt switch, you are actually purchasing a 33 kilovolt switch with a 22 kilovolt label on it. So you're paying too much, and it is much bigger. So we had wanted for the last 20 years plus to get the whole system changed to 11 kilovolt from 22. At one point in 2009, the TNB also realized that they would like to do it not just for Auroville, but for the whole area. So they were telling us, you give us 2 acres of land, and we will put a 110 by 11 kilovolt substation, and everyone in this area, we remove the 22 and put 11.
So the transformer cost and the line cost, the switchboard cost, all that will be reduced to not even half, or less.
Unfortunately, Auroville, for some internal process reasons, could not agree on to give those 2 acres of land, so that idea was dropped. They came back with another proposal to have a different type of land. It's a long story. Finally, 2-3 years ago, when again we told them, look, we want 11 kV, they said, listen, we have come to the conclusion that in any case we want to build a substation there because the Irumbai substation is getting heavily overloaded. So if you give us 2 acres of land now, we will build a 110 by 22 by 11. So in other words, there will be a 110 incomer. There will be about 4 feeders, 22 for the villages around, and we can give you an 11 kV feeder provided you pay for it. They were no longer interested to convert the whole area into 11 because they could not.
They could not manage
the cost of all the changing all the transformers. As you know, TNB is in a very bad financial position. So the 2 acres was given, leased out to them for near it in Javadi. They have started the work. So the idea is basically they built a substation, 110 incoming, 22 kV, 4 feeders out for village loads and 1 feeder for us. The work has been stopped because some landowners are objecting to the towers coming into their land. Most of the towers come on Auroville land, but a few come on private land, so that dispute is being taken care of or being discussed now, negotiated. So here you can see why, also from a cost perspective, the migration to 11 kV is very interesting. I mean, you take a transformer, same 250 kVA, 11 kV would cost you 8 lakhs and 22 kV cost you 14. And same thing for switchgear and cables. So there is a very strong case to go for 11 kilovolts. So we decided then, we recommended to the TTC, listen guys, whether you have your DDPs ready or not, we need an electricity plan. We cannot keep giving ad hoc connections, mix of overhead lines and cables going here and there. So a tender was written for doing this plan, and it was won by a company in Calcutta called Development Consultants Limited. We were quite happy that they won the tender because the chairman, the late chairman, Mr. Dutt, was also a devotee and used to come to Matamildi and the ashram quite often. And they did it at a very reasonable price. So they prepared a plan with us together, all the way till 50,000 people, but designed in such a way that you can implement it in small steps. So it has an HT plan, it has an LT plan, it has a road and street lighting plan. It has got phasing. The phasing is, of course, taken from the master plan of Auroville, 5, 15, 25, and 50. It comes to basically a distribution capacity of almost 1 kilowatt per person. Now you'll be wondering, is that not low? Yeah, that is low, but it is, you always have to look at diversity factors. It's not that everyone has all the load on all the time. So you come with a capacity needed of, say, almost a kilowatt per person. So 11 kV will be the distribution voltage, not 22. Now the question was, how do we get now 11? At that time we were wondering, how do we get? One option was you convert, you take a 22 kV incomer and you step it down to 11. Then all the transformer losses will come to Auroville's account. And in any case, once we cross 5 megawatt, we have to again migrate to 110 kilovolts. Then you become a 110 kV consumer. So we looked at various options. I won't bother you with the details, but basically, let me go straight away to that conclusion. This was plan 1. So we have 22. We keep the 22 of TNB till they change and we step it down ourselves, was option 1. Option 2 was we have dual ratio transformers. So they can be switched over from 22 to 11 once the 11 comes. And we have done initially this particular option. The first 4 or 5 transformers are this. But then we came ourselves, after the master plan was already completed, with an option 3, which was that we heard several times that TNB was interested in building a substation for other reasons than Auroville also. So we said, listen, if we can engage with them, then maybe we can accelerate the 11 kV, and that's what is happening now with the new substation. Ultimately, by the way, once we cross about 5 megawatt, I think it's 5 megawatt, the limit for, then we have to become a 110 consumer, and then we can build our own 110 by 11 nice indoor substation, very compact. That is, of course, to be done at some point of time also. We briefed the DCL. We had by the way, we had a very nice, constructive interaction. It was not a typical consultant-client relationship. In fact, they wrote a very nice letter when they were done that they picked up a lot of nice ideas from Auroville, which they are implementing later. For example, this idea of 250 kVA as a limit. Initially, they said, no, why 250? 500 kVA minimum, 750 kVA. So we convinced them that initially the capital cost is a bit higher, because if I put 2 transformers of 250 rather than 1 of 500, I have an initial capital cost which is a bit higher, but we could convince them with simple calculations that the reduction in energy losses, etc., would pay that back in a couple of years. So they got completely convinced. Have you installed any transformers beyond 250 kVA? No. Okay, so. No, I just want to check before I commit. So electrical service is not going beyond 250 kVA. So if the load is 500, it will become 2 times 250, 1 here and 1 there. So you bring the high tension closer to the load. And if you do that, you reduce the energy losses tremendously.
And the cable size also, we have not gone more than 150.
150. 185 or 150?
180.
185. So basically, the main features of that electrical plan are there is a high tension ring That high tension ring will be 11 kilovolt. Now for the time being it is 22. It has a total cross section of 600 square millimeter aluminium, but we are doing it in 2 steps. Right now, one cable is almost laid of 300 square mm on one side of the crown, and the other one will be laid later. Now, why do we do that? First of all, it is very difficult to justify financially that you invest now for 50,000 people in a ring. Second thing is, having 2 cables instead of 1 gives you more resilience. If tomorrow one cable would fail, you can do with a bit of load shedding, you can still feed the essential loads in Auroville. So finally, if this is the crown, there will be one high tension cable of 300 square mm on this side and one on that side. It is now a 22 kV cable, but you can operate, of course, a 22 kV cable at 11 kV, not the other way around. So basically, how would it work? You have a ring, and then you go with, along the radius, you penetrate into the urban fabric. I mean, these are just illustrative only. Don't think it will be literally like this. As the town grows, so that is the nice thing about it, it's very modular. So if suppose the TDC decides to focus on Sector 1 and Sector 2 of the residential zone, which is actually designed for 5,000 people, where only 800 are staying, then that radial will be done first, along with the spur lines going from the radial. So you can keep on building on it, but of course the ring on which you build is like the foundation of a building. That has to be designed straight away now for half and later for the full when the second cable is laid. So you keep on doing that, and then finally we always have a moment of tension, whether it fits or not. Does it fit? Ah, my God, what a relief. So this is what you basically do, and you connect it, of course, to the outside world, at least at 1 or 2 places. Again, for the reason which I gave earlier, that you don't want to become an island with enormous amount of storage. Now maybe this is basically the summary. So 2 connections to the outside world. Finally, an interconnection at 110 kV level when we cross a certain population. Transformers are all indoor, LT underground cables, so no more overhead lines, all gone. Energy efficient systems, because of this design, we get a very low I²R losses. The grid is fed from Auroville grid-connected renewable energy systems, as I explained in the earlier presentation. They can export to each other and import from each other, the buildings and the clusters. All the meters that electrical service installs are all bidirectional meters, for those who know what a bidirectional meter is. So they are solar ready. And there is, by the way, no cost difference between the so-called unidirectional and bidirectional meter. It is only the manufacturers who want you to believe, but they understand that we understand that there is no difference. So we get bidirectional meters with 4-quadrant metering at the same cost as people pay for a normal unidirectional meter. They do energy metering audits online. Already we have, in March 21, we have 400 kilowatt of solar up and running. Off-grid in the green belt, by the way, I forgot completely to mention that. Sorry for that. In the green belt, there are a lot of standalone systems. I think you must be on standalone, Alan. So that means not grid connected, battery bank, solar, and the battery has to take you through. Did you have any problem with that 1 week of rain or not? So it means you have a good battery bank, quite a big one, yeah. And Mona, conversion of TNB overhead lines to underground. How many service connections have you cancelled of TNB?
We have cancelled about 565 service connections.
Cancelled means overhead line connections, all taken out and all merged into one high tension connection.
Whole of Bharat Niwas area has been completely removed. Whole of Matru Mandir, residential zone, up to admin area. We have completely removed all the overhead lines, all the transformers of TNB. We have our own underground cable and our own distribution transformers in 5 different locations.
Yeah.
Our own transformers, which are giving supply by AC number 86.
The connection is right there. So it is now a 22 kV connection, and from there it distributes through the ring to the whole of Auroville. So what has been done till now, the municipal energy plan and future installations was done in 2003. The code of practice has been written and is being updated every 2 years. It's a code of practice that we have ourselves designed, which is, of course, taking into account the statutory provisions, but we go a bit beyond it. We do a bit better, if I may use that word. And then the electrical master plan. So what are the clusters already included?
Matru Mandir, we have included Bharat Niwas, Visitor Center, whole of nursery, we have center field area, language lab, and Bharat Niwas, no, Bharat Niwas I have mentioned. The admin zone completely we have covered with the new transformers. And the residential zone we have covered almost up to certitude. Few more service connections left to be connected in certitude area. All the rest is connected to one HD service connection.
So the advantage of doing this is not only that we got rid of the overhead lines, but as I mentioned in the earlier presentation, we can now transport energy, solar energy, renewable energy from one cluster to the other cluster over our own network.
Of course, the maintenance work is also very minimum now. We don't have much maintenance. Like we used to send 3 teams at a time to attend the overhead line fault and all. Now we have got only 1 team to attend the underground cable system.
So this is what is planned for 21, 22, 22, 23. The TNB substation that's fully in their control. We have nothing to do with it. We hope that they can overcome this problem. Then we have to build a receiving station next to it to receive the 11 kV from them. And then through one of the radios, it has to be taken to the ring. So clusters that will be included in 21, 22, and 22, 23 are?
Visitor Center.
Yeah.
And then we have industrial zone.
Yeah.
Mona, your area. And cultural zone.
You are still having overhead lines, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Still in overhead line.
Yeah, this famous topic of the right-of-way, you see, I think Toby is going to give a presentation in one of the sessions on the whole infrastructure, so I don't want to go deep into it. But it is so important that these underground services are laid in the right place from the beginning. It is almost impossible, and if it is possible, extremely expensive, to tell, for example, after a high-tension cable is laid, to say, sorry, actually, it should have been laid there. It's just impossible. So that's why this right-of-way clearing is not just to clear it, but to also physically see, okay, here it is coming, because there could even be a genuine error of a new surveyor coming to the site, and he says, yes, you can build a storeroom here. He checks, and yeah, go ahead. And the person builds the storeroom, and the next surveyor who comes, who knows his job better, says, no, this was supposed to be a road. So even to avoid genuine errors, if the right-of-ways are cleared, and on both sides the infrastructure is properly installed, what we have done, by the way, we have put for every service a sub-corridor. So if the corridor is, say, this much, there is high tension at 1.20 meters, low tension at 70 centimeters, water at 50, and they also have a horizontal clearance. Sometimes people ask me, but why are you doing all this? If you look at Pondicherry and Aero Street, they manage all these cables in just this much of pavement. The truth is that those were organically grown. Pondicherry had overhead telephone, overhead electricity, and sewage was not even there, it was an open drain. So once they decided to go underground, they simply opened whatever they could open and put the cables on top of each other. We are not going to do that because we have a planned city, so we can do it properly to have each service having its own unique sub-corridor. You don't want the guy from telephones to puncture a high-tension cable, or vice versa. You don't want a water guy to puncture the electrical cable, or vice versa. So this was an exercise which was done in 13-14 with all the infrastructure services of Auroville together, and we studied all sorts of standards from different countries, Australia, Western Europe, United States, and we came to a standard that we say, okay, this is the minimum we have to do to have clearance and to have reliable systems. In most cases, you can do it under the pavement. If you have a pedestrian pavement, if you take most of the West European countries, they have the carriageway, and they have, for pedestrians, they have, or cycles, they have on 2 sides these paver blocks, which in the country where I come from is just a 30 by 30 centimeter concrete slab, and you remove them when you want to change something, there's sand below, and you put it back. But it has to be a dedicated corridor. You don't want all this stuff to be thrown on top of each other in a very messy way. I was once in Churchgate in Bombay, and the road was open, and that also has organically grown. In Calcutta, they even started with DC first, direct current, and then it's a complete mess there. So let us not go in that direction. Let us plan it properly so that it also can be maintained properly. This is not what we are going to do, by the way, don't worry, but this is a typical, one of those cross-sections that we studied from one of the countries, I don't remember which one, how each service has got a dedicated subcorridor, dedicated depth and dedicated width. And there are drawings, so when, for example, a contractor is called by the government to repair an LT cable, he knows exactly where to dig, and 90% chance that he actually will find that cable there. And there is a rule in some of these countries that if he doesn't find the cable there, but he finds it 10 centimeters to the left, he has to report that to the cadastre, where they will update then the data bank. So this is how it is typically done. Very often the stormwater drain or the sewage is even under the road, because there you never have to go back to. That's permanent. These are usually these big concrete pipes with manholes every so many meters. But all the other services will have to be accessible for repair, upgradation, replacement, etc., etc. Yeah, so the role definition, the TDC releases the layouts, the Auroville service does the marking and clearing, and the infrastructure service install in the dedicated. I think this we have already covered in the separate presentation, so I don't want to repeat. You see the wind is also there, but in our case that is remote. And my last point is that if you want to be, a lot of people use this term smart grid. It's very fashionable. In our view, a smart grid, this is not a smart grid. This is the conventional grid where there is a one-way flow of energy from big power stations to millions of consumers. The smart grid is this, where there are multi-directional feeders. The highway is no longer a one-way highway, it is a network. And thank God that the electrical cables and wires are much more flexible than human beings. They don't care whether the electricity flows from left to right or right to left. So we're quite happy to, okay, you come this way, that way, no issue at all. You have to switch, some switch gear might have to be changed, some relays, but you can make the existing grid into this with not too much of intervention. This we have already covered. So this is a typical grid-connected rooftop solar system. Energy storage we have covered already in the previous one. It's a very important ingredient. Smart grid we have already covered also. And I think this also we have covered, and then we thank you. (17:44), 15 minutes.
Hi, my name is Raj.
Yes, Raj.
I have seen some cross sections where the service are heavily driven, driving the design of the pathways or the roads, which we are about to design. So my question is, we are putting so much importance to these electrical, telephone, cable data. Just I want to come back. In my lifetime, I grew up in a gobar gas light. Not only just stove, gobar gas light, then I switched to, my family switched to electricity. Then now I'm on completely off the grid, which I live in a green belt. So my question is changing fast. So we are designing for the future and tomorrow. How relevant is it today? We're putting so much energy into designing these structures. They're all ultimately design our roads and so forth. So how important is that to concentrate on?
Yeah, you see, normally it should be done the other way around. As I explained a little bit earlier, normally you would have the DDPs ready, and then the infrastructure follows the DDPs. But quite frankly, Auroville failed to prepare DDPs, and at the same time there were people living here who wanted water, electricity, and communication. So the infrastructure took the lead. We put the cart before the horse. And I hope that with this exercise, which is going to happen now, that the horse comes back in front of the cart. Now, whether you go for renewable energy, standalone or not, you need some services to be underground. What you normally should do is that you first make a calculation, what do I need for mobility? You don't talk about infrastructure service. What do I need for mobility? So do I need 2 lanes that makes maybe 6.6 meters width? Do I need a cycle path or not? And then you add it all up. And then you add the same thing, you do the same adding up for the services. Now, if the services are more than that width, then you have to sit, can we do something about it? Or you say, okay, then we go for the highest of the two. So unfortunately, what has happened, although Helmut presented this mobility study this morning, unfortunately, a lot of studies have never been converted into plans. They remain studies on a shelf in the office. So if now some of these studies, with the help of the Vastu Shilpa organization, become actually plans, then henceforward the infrastructure services can work with those plans. Nobody likes to do infrastructure first and planning after. So, and by the way, the only thing that electrical service is doing by now is only laying the cable for the backbone which is needed for the town, whichever DDP comes. DDP cables, if I may call them, have not been installed. Because the DDP cable means, for example, if you go from the transformer into sector 1, we have no clue what that cable size has to be, unless the DDP is prepared. So all what is being done today on the crown and one radial only is what we call in our language the backbone, which irrespective of what the DDP is coming out, that backbone is needed. And in the case of the high tension cable, as I explained, only 50% of the backbone right now. So we do hope that the horse will come back in front of the cart, that it is led by DDP planning and not by infrastructure planning. On what basis, for example, will the electrical service decide that from the Vikas radial into sector 1 and 2, what size of cable they have to put? They have no clue. So when people put pressure, and some of the architects put pressure, Punusami, I'm going to build a house there, I want a cable now. I don't care about the future. Then what will he do? Then he may put a cable which is 2 times of what is needed, so he can manage another 5 houses on the same cable. But that's not the way to plan. He should know in advance that that house is part of a cluster which is connected to feeder pillar number 22. Feeder pillar number 22 is connected to transformer 5. And then it is just a question of from the feeder pillar to lay a correct cable to that particular house. That is missing today. So I would request all the architects and planners, please put that horse back in front of the cart. We feel much more comfortable. And the standalone, if you have time, I will sit with you separately. I can't say I will convince you, but I will be able to tell you that if you get connected to a cluster like this, because you see, sometimes people in Auroville also are against the wrong thing. Don't be against cables or wires. Be against the electron that goes through it, which is maybe black or gray. But a wire or a cable is just connecting stuff. It's like you can't be against roads. You can be against the traffic on the road. So standalone has a lot of disadvantages. In fact, we did a study once of the Greenbelt standalone systems, the cost per kilowatt hour compared with the cluster system. It came 4 or 5 times, cost per kilowatt hour. So we will sit separately.
So a part of my question is already answered. It was about the DDP being there first and the infrastructure. How does that work? But what I see, you've answered that maybe the electrical service would not know the size of cable to do. But my question is also what I saw very relevant into your sections and your examples was what would come on top of the cables for it to be accessed easily. Would that also not be a part of the DDP which will help you find the exact location of the cables? So even right now when it talks about the backbone, isn't right now not having the DDP to even lay the backbone is also a constraint for you to not have the exact location and exact, the detail of what's going to come on top of where the the cable has been laid?
See, the backbone is being laid as of now along right of ways which are mentioned in the master plan itself. We call them master plan right of ways, which is the crown and the radials. No other cables are being laid except in some communities along paths. What the DDP will tell us, suppose they make a DDP of the residential zone, 5 sectors. In each sector there will be clusters. The DDP planners will tell us per cluster what is the expected load, expected consumption. And then they will also tell us how will people go, say, from the radial to that cluster, the paths and the internal roads and all that. Then the routing of the cable becomes that path, and the size of the cable becomes that load. See, cables, pipes always have to be laid along a path or a road so that you can always access them. It makes no sense to have the road here and the cable 20 meters further on in the bush. you have to be able to go there. In case of high-tension cables, you have to go there even with a big equipment and a big drum, etc. So accessibility for repair, maintenance, upgradation, replacement is a must. And that's why all over the world, these services are always laid on both sides of the mobility corridor. So if the DDP defines where the mobility corridor comes, the infrastructure has no choice but to go along that. So the routing gets decided by the mobility corridors, and the sizing gets decided by the loads. Same thing for water. Same thing for internet. Same thing for wastewater, everything.
It's the DREAMWEAVING first, Julia. Sorry, that's kind of general.
Yeah, I have a question regarding, you had explained something the other day when we met last Monday, that you see the infrastructure corridor as something fixed, on the ground now I'm talking, that's fixed. But you said something that the road can move, but the infrastructure corridor has to be this perfect circle. Am I right in my understanding?
No, what I have understood, we have received a cross-section drawing from the TDC. The last version was February 2020. February 2020 is the last version that the TDC distributed to the infrastructure services. Before that, they had a September 2016 version, and they had before that some 11 version. The last version shows a carriageway of 6.7, of which the center line is that famous 690 from the banyan tree, and that carriageway is a perfect circle. But the space on both sides of the 6.7 is not equal. On one side it is more, and on one side it is less. And one reason is that on one side there is a cycle path, and on the other side there is not. And on one side there are more services, so the services have gone below the cycle path. That is the reason. So if the TDC changes it, you see, look, for infrastructure it's very simple. It has to be accessible at any given time, and you have to be able to access it quickly. Like if the cable fails now, within 1 hour they have to be able to go inside and see what happened. So if the accessibility is there, the infrastructure services will not bother much.
Moreover, it has to be approved by the electrical inspectorate also. It has to be next to the road, obviously.
No,
it cannot be anywhere else.
That's clear.
So that has to
But
be
my
very
point was then, what I've understood now after then you wouldn't have anything against if we all decide, then from the infrastructure point of view, then if there is a slight bend there, right? If 30 meters or 20 meters or even 10, what we saw in Darkhali today was it's just a few meters. That, because we've already laid the cable there, right?
I think that topic you should discuss when the overall this is a discussion on electricity. So I don't want to get into those details. I have a lot of personal views on it, which I will not share now, because this meeting was meant for electricity and energy, but Toby is doing a session on the overall infrastructure, and then you can discuss that. You can also ask questions of, what happens if a 6.7 meter road is going to meander? What happens to the mobility part of it? So let's not discuss that now.
I'm talking only about the cable.
The cable is always on both sides.
No,
not only the cable.
In Darkhali, what has been laid was laid before 3-4 years. And now there's some change in the survey. And so it's not really where it's supposed to be, what we saw. So I'm saying that doesn't match.
No, in fact, in several places, another example is Tensi's place, right? There, when he was laying the cable, he was told, no, you don't put it here, you put it there. So there are some stretches, again, a lot of cost, where what will have to be done is a new cable will have to be laid, and the old one has to be removed and used somewhere else. All extra. That's why I said, no, once and for all, you decide where the infrastructure comes and don't change it. Changing is extremely expensive. If a cable along the ground goes like this and there is a T-junction to a transformer, can you imagine what it means if you have to shift that cable and the whole transformer connection and the switch gear? It is just totally crazy. So we have been demanding from all the TDCs of the past, you can DDP forever, but freeze the infrastructure corridors, where they will come. How much will come, what size, that will be DDP dependent. In the same way with mobility, if you look at, for example, the same Nehru Street example. Nehru Street at one time was horse carts, then it was one-way traffic, two-way traffic, no traffic. But where the mobility takes place is always frozen. What type of mobility may evolve? I have lived in Pune for a few years. MG Road in Pune, while I was there, became in the weekends a pedestrian-only street. two-way became one-way traffic. So what you cannot change, you see, once you fix a right-of-way and there is building on this side, on that side, you can't broaden the road, right? You can only make it narrower. So that is something you can't play with. All the rest you can play with. So our request from the infrastructure service for years has been either prepare a DDPs and the DDPs include the infrastructure. If you are not doing that, at least decide where it will come. Because we have a population living here that wants electricity, water, and internet 24/7. So it is basically, I would put that ball back in the court of the planners, quite frankly. I'm going to be very blunt. The infrastructure was more proactive than the planners, because the infrastructure said we have to stop this teeny-bee story of individual connections, poles, spaghetti, etc. And the planners could not come to an agreement to plan. And I think now the dream weaving is trying to bring everybody together and take the plan forward. Get the horse in front of the cart. That's all I'm asking. And then the cart will go also in the right carriageway.
5 minutes. So we have Julio and Omar.
I guess my main question is not going to be answered, so I'll ask something else. Because I know that, Tuan, you're talking always about clearing the right of way for all the radials and the ring road and everything. But what is your timeline for actually laying the HT cable under the radials and the outer ring road?
That depends on the DDPs. See, DDPs have a what factor and a when factor. So if the what is clear, it determines what has to be laid, and when the when factor is clear, it will tell when it is to be laid. That's called phasing. In the morning, when Srivatsa presented, he talked about phasing. And by the way, I would like to comment on one question which was asked maybe by you, or by somebody else, about this implementation. Look, when you implement, suppose we say we want to add 5,000 beds, houses for 5,000 people. Then you need also educational facilities, health facilities, more collectivication. You cannot say, I put in the residential zone 5,000 houses. So all this has to be interconnected. So suppose we say 5,000 or 10,000, then the education people will say, we have calculated that with this 5,000 and this type of a demography, we need so many more schools. At that time, Punaswamy cannot say, oh, sorry, I forgot to lay a backbone to the educational zone, so you have to wait 5 years. So you make a backbone also, so that when the zonal development takes place, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel then. Then you only have to connect in from the main backbone into the zones. That is the whole idea of a backbone. If Auroville didn't have the zones, and if everything would be in one place, it would be a bit easier. But today you have to have zonal balancing. You have to have economic activities for 5,000 people. You have to have educational activities for 5,000 people. So the implementation question of this morning, I would have added to what Srivatsa said, has to be a balanced implementation.
But this is the last one, no? Yeah. So it's okay.
And by the way, this right of way was not only by me. All the infrastructure services of Auroville have been asking for it. We have something like 25 letters signed by everyone, Chandresh, Luca, that please, please, please define this. Otherwise we get into a mess. There are still a lot of cables, by the way, in Auroville. And you have gone today on a crown walk. I will take you on another walk where there are storerooms, cycle sheds, houses on top of cables and pipes. You can never get there. We don't want that. And who's going to pay for all this? So you want to lay them straight away where they belong. That's all we're asking.
Yes. No, I'm actually agreeing with Tuan on the issue of the horse has to come in front of the cart. And I feel like this is a good end for this because it shows it gives a sense of the duty on the shoulders of all the planners and the architects, because this is the mission of the moment, right? And because the issue of a right of way is quite complex. I wish it was as simple as infrastructure. It includes bioclimatic factors. You could make the wrong decision and you end up with much degrees higher in a city. It includes water issues, as we have seen with Giulio today. It includes several systems connecting, and to work on this complexity, I don't even think only the architects. It has to be the architects with the engineers, because this is the integrative design process. And just we have to be careful while working on the ground, because we could cause problems, and at the same time feel the responsibility to quickly start getting something to convincing, so we avoid these problems in the future. Yeah.
Don't forget the social infrastructure. See, the physical infrastructure has to serve the social infrastructure. If you do not design the social infrastructure, the physical infrastructure starts having its own life on its own. Makes no sense. You know, I have been in meetings with Punaswamy, Prasannaram, and Manikantan, where they asked me for advice that, look, we have an application from architect so-and-so to connect so-and-so building, and there is no DDP. What cable size do we put? So we make almost a wild guess. Well, it is probably in the next 5 years, so-and-so other buildings may come there, so let's go for 95 square mm. It's a totally illogical, irrational decision you take. So please get the DDPs on paper.
Okay, it's now 2 minutes past 6.
Very good.
Giulio has a question. It's okay. So, yay, first day is over. Yay. Tomorrow we start at 8 with Olivier, who's going to talk about economy in the city, and then we have Island, arboriculture, urban forestry, and then the team of the Line of Goodwill. I still don't know who's going to talk, and followed by Lata, who's going to talk about regional context. So please be here at 8, even 5 minutes before 8. Thank you.